Well, hello. Well,
Well,
hello.
hello.
Well, hello. Mike, I think that we are the embodiment of the emoji with the monocle.
Let's
You
see.
know that. There you go. You
Good
look just like it.
evening, my friend.
I can't tell if the monocle emoji is supposed to be kind of like,
Who
does that
wears monocles? Nobody wears them.
super villains?
You know what? I cannot honestly say I ever remember seeing an actual monocle outside of like Hogan's Heroes or something. I've never in all my years in Philadelphia or anywhere like walking down the street, gone past, "Hmm, excuse me, young man.
Maybe that's like a not an American thing.
Can you tell me where the War Criminal Museum is?"
Oh, that's great. But yeah, well, maybe you need to bring that look in, Mike. You need to start rocking the Colonel Clink. Start rocking that look.
Well, I've got the
Yeah,
shake my head, so
I think we got you ready for Halloween. A little Hogan's Hero cosplay. I could be the black guy from Hogan's Heroes who wore the beanie on the
what
back of
was
his
his
head.
name? He was
I
a
don't know.
radio. No, he wasn't the radio guy, right? Was
It's
he?
Jackson or something. I don't remember.
Jackson.
Well, of course it's Jackson. What other names would a black guy have on TV back then? Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Pencil to Pencils, your favorite pandemic podcast. It is Saturday night. I hope everybody is well or as well as can be expected. I am Jamar Nicholas, Philadelphia's favorite son. I think I lost some weight. Favorite son, and
Favorite
also,
ton of fun. Wow.
whoa, whoa, whoa. My favorite T-shirt I ever saw it said, "I'm fat, let's party" on it. I thought that was funny. I guess
Well, were there a bunch of stains on it?
no, but hey, you got to lead into your gifts, right? This is Jamar Nicholas back at it again, pencil to pencil. I'm joined as usual by my best bud and modern master of comic books, Mike Manley. Say hi, Mike.
I have to be very careful. I see that robot behind me.
Is
That robot. It's like he's
that's,
monitoring me.
oh, that's your router, is it?
That's my flux capacitor.
Oh yeah, 188 gigawatts. That's funny. I'm real amped up tonight. That's funny.
You drink a lot of coffee?
Yeah, no, you know what? I just finished dinner, and I'm just kind of like, we're trying to be like
Dinner of what? Like speed soup, speed soup.
No, I've been trying to eat better, and I just had some nice leafy greens. Trying to watch my deal because we got to watch our deals at our age, Mike. So he's got nothing to say to that. So I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, the good people at Graphics League. See the John above my head, who create and manufacture Clip Studio Paint, the cartoonist tool, and also our good buddy John Morrow over at Tomorrow's Publishing. I should be better at that. Who almost everybody on this podcast tonight has a hand in some way in. Oh, there you go. And two more stuff. I think has Terry done anything for John?
I don't know if Terry's done. Well, we'll ask him.
Yeah, we'll ask him. Yeah, we'll ask him. And also our good buddy JRD says that there's a sale going on. I think it's still the 50% off sale at for Clip Studio Paint. So get on that. So I'm very excited, Mike Manley, to bring in our good buddy Terry Beatty. Terry is an acclaimed cartoonist who has his vines run deep through comic books, and I hope we can touch on a lot of his milestones in his career. And also, what he's doing right now is he is the writer and the illustrator of the daily legacy strip Rex Morgan, MD.
Our sister strip.
That's right, and you and Terry both do legacy comic strips, which I think is super amazing. Mike,
although some people have, well, we'll talk about that with Terry. Some people have problems with those legacy strips.
Oh, maybe that's a good place to start.
We've even talked to people on the show we're not happy with Legacy Street.
there's a vein going through this. So I see that Terry is taking up some light reading in the green room. We're going to bring him on. So you guys are in for a great treat. Let's talk to Terry Beatty. Come on in, Terry.
Oh, hi guys. I was just doing some reading. How are you?
Well, hello. Let me get
Anyway,
these.
I'll put that away.
Go ahead.
That was a plug.
What was that?
That's the Yo Studios Johnny Dynamite book that reprints Pete Morissy's Johnny Dynamite series and has actually a Ms. Tree Johnny Dynamite crossover story in it by Max Collins and me.
Very cool.
Max and I edited that, put it together because we own the rights to the series. Cool book, and it's mostly not by me, so I can say that honestly.
Is Johnny Dynamite, is that public domain?
We own the rights and we own the trademark and we own the name.
Okay.
There's a question. There's a question over whether the content is public domain or not. I would say I don't think so, considering what we paid for the rights for it. Other people would argue against that. So I don't want to get into that too much, but yeah, but it's a beautiful book.
Yeah. He was an interesting artist, Pete Morrissey.
He was.
He was a policeman, wasn't he?
He was a cop. He was a New York cop. A lot of his career, he was moonlighting, drawing the comics, which is why he used his initials, PAM, and signed his work Pam, because he wasn't supposed to be moonlighting. Because you're not supposed to have a second job when you're.
That's actually part of the rules of being a
at least it was then, yeah.
He doesn't get shaken down by the guys at Charlton. We're going to expose your ring.
Well, Charlton has a little bit of a hinky history, as I understand, as far as some law-abiding and non-law-abiding people involved with the money and the finances.
Wow.
But that's true about a lot of comics publishers. That there's mob money involved very early on in these stories, guys.
Right.
Yeah,
you get to do this.
Folks don't want to hear that, but that's the truth.
Is that a hidden part of the history of comics? Because nobody, like you said, nobody really talks about where the money was coming from.
Yeah, well, it's it's in the books, but people want to talk about. The mob
controlled the distribution,
right,
in the day, right.
Yeah,
so if you wanted your stand on the corner, and didn't want a truck to suddenly just drive through it accidentally one day,
you gotta pay the Bowery Boys. Yeah. Is that it?
Some of that was in was that some of that in Cavalier and Clay? I don't remember now, but they did talk about some of the. A lot of people don't realize that, like, even DC controlled how many books Marvel could put out.
Oh, absolutely.
Back in the day.
Yeah, that's why there were only 8 titles for the longest time.
Wow.
And why there were those split books, like Tales to Astonish and Strange Tales, because they couldn't do an Iron Man and a Captain America comics, so they smushed them together.
Oh wow! I did. I'm doing my car said. I did not know that.
Okay. Weird, wacky stuff.
I love it. Wild stuff. Before we get too deep into this, one thing I've been saying lately, Terry, is that every one of our guests brings their people with them. So there's always kind of a nice influx of new watchers every time we have a new guest on. So I want to give them some instructions, if you don't mind, real quick.
Alrighty.
If you're new to the podcast, hello. If you're watching on our live feed on our Facebook page, hello. YouTube, the same. The way this works is that Mike, Terry, and myself are going to have what they call in the business shop talk. We're just going to kick it and talk about pens and art supplies and the history of comics and things like that. And you, dear viewer, can be involved if you throw in some questions into the chat room. And you please comment and talk to each other as you may inside the chat. But if you have a question for us, please type it into the radio box, and I will do my best to get it on. Thank you. All right.
And use your decoder ring.
That's right. Drink more Ovaltine. So, Terry, let's start at the top. What's been your main gig for the last couple of years?
Well, the main gig and really only gig, because it's all encompassing, is writing and drawing Rex Morgan. For a while, I was also drawing the Phantom Sunday page. So, Mike and I were sort of sharing that strip for a while. But once I took over writing Rex, it just became too much to do both jobs. I was working 7 days a week, and I am 62 years old, and I have 2 kids in grade school, and it was just too much. So I backed off from Phantom, kind of reluctantly, but suddenly I was writing and drawing this 7 days a week strip, and that was bringing in the lion's share of the money. And plus I had pretty much full control over it at that point. So that was the one I had to stick with.
So when did you let the Phantom go? That was pretty recent, right?
It's been a couple of years, I think over 2 years.
I remember when Mike started doing Phantom, and you guys were so connected. I'll say jealous in a weird way, because I went from not knowing anyone who was doing a daily strip to a bunch of people that were doing daily strips all at the same time. And it's its own very interesting soup that you guys swim around in. So
we didn't all live together.
No, but it is odd. It's like I know everybody who's working on the story strips now. Because we're all mostly old, comic book people, and we're all in contact with each other and share stories and information. And it's just really strange to be, part of this little club, and it's a little club now because there aren't that many of the story strips left.
Well, there's not that many syndicates. I mean, if you go back into the 70s, there were a bunch of syndicates, which then sort of got absorbed by the bigger syndicates, which is
absolutely.
Like when I saw the copyright on the Phantom is King, but the copyright on Judge Parker is North American. Is that what is on yours?
That's the same thing for Rex Morgan, yeah.
So I think
that seems odd. That's just this weird leftover. I don't know why they don't transition that to King Features, but I know there's sort of a reluctance as regards change of any sort where the strips are concerned. Although, does anybody pay any attention to the little copyright indicia on the strips? I don't know.
Right.
So now you took over Rex from who?
Graham Nolan.
Okay.
And who also drew the Phantom for a while.
Right.
So, yeah.
There's like 7 artists who drew Batman who also drew the Phantom.
Yeah.
It's like a very limited amount of, but it's like,
and you and I are both in that club, right?
Right. Yeah. And they're mostly guys who worked for DC.
Yeah.
Back in the day. It's very, very, well, you sort of had that New York slick school, they used to call it, which was like the Barry brothers, who were like the DC house style for basically the 50s into the early 60s. And I know that, and then who was the guy who drew it before Graham?
There was Cy Berry for years, and then I think Keith Williams drew it for a little bit. I'm blanking on the name of the other guy who drew it briefly. And there's guys who ghosted it too, who never get any credit. There are plenty of people who did ghost penciling for Cy, including Jose Delbo and Rich Buckler and Lord knows who. I
know Carmine did, supposedly. Infantino did back in the day too.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And you can sort of, even though Cy Berry inked all the stuff, you can tell, because I do have some PDFs of the old strips, you can tell that somebody else drew that strip. And then on Rex, it was the same thing. You had, 5 or 6 guys from the beginning, I think?
Yeah, there was Bradley and Edgington who did it forever, and were sort of an odd art team in that one guy drew the characters and the other guy drew the backgrounds. And it's the only instance I can think of where the background artist shared a credit with the character artist. on a newspaper strip, because usually the background guys are just an assistant and they don't get any credit.
Yeah, like Tex Blaisdell never got a credit on.
No, nor Rick Fletcher on Dick Tracy till he took over the whole art job. And Tony DiPreta drew it for a while. Fernando da Silva drew it for a bit, and those strips are gorgeous. Frank Springer drew it briefly.
Wow.
Yeah, and all that stuff's just, it's never been reprinted. You can't find it on the web. It's, for all intents and purposes, is lost because you just can't access it anywhere. Which is unfortunate because, like I said, especially the Springer and the Da Silva periods are just beautiful.
Yeah, I know that even King does not have full copies of their strips, and they don't have color. They don't have any color proofs of any of their old strips. Like if you pay on Comics Kingdom, you can go on and look at the strips that come out every day, but you can also go look at their vintage strips. But they're always in black and white because they don't have color copies of any of the old strips.
Yeah. Well, it's weird what people and the companies decided they should keep. I know Woody Wilson told me that that Nick Dallas kept his scripts and threw away the artist proofs. So he had no art on all these, but he had all his scripts packed away. And
that's amazing.
Ridiculous.
That would just be like keeping the scripts in a movie, but throwing away everything that's on TMC. Who needs the film? We don't need the film. Yeah, we got Rita Hayworth's script here.
Just read the screenplay.
That's ridiculous. And a question I have for some of the legacy stuff. I know that at one point you could go to the B. Dalton bookseller and go to the humor section and get a Garfield book or maybe like a Blondie collection. But there didn't ever seem to be a lot of the legacy kind of I call them soap opera strips.
Well, yeah, absolutely, soap opera strips. Very little of that was ever reprinted. I think there was a Mary Worth paperback. There were a half a dozen Rex Morgan comic books, including Teenage Dope Slaves, which is notorious for, I think, being an insurrection of the innocent. I don't, no. I have a couple of the Rex Morgan regular title books because those are fairly cheap and not that hard to pick up. But Teenage Dope Slaves is a pricey book.
You should change the name of the strip to
just call it Teenage Dope Slaves. And that's the crazy thing. It's a Rex Morgan story. Reprinted, but with a sensational title and a sensational cover.
Wow!
But I will say the early years of the strip, and there's on Facebook, there's a website called the Batavia Funny Pages or something like that, close to that. And John Wells, who runs that, has been reprinting early Rex Morgan stuff from clipped strips from his collection. And thank God there are collectors out there who save this stuff because they're the only source for it.
Yeah.
And the very early years of that strip, it's a pretty cool strip. And
the characters were very different. I mean, Dallas wrote that stuff. It was more like Perry Mason. It was more like contemporary TV shows in the late 50s, early 60s as far as the storylines. Even like Judge Parker. I mean, he was like a man of action kind of thing. He just didn't sit around,
Yeah.
his office.
Well, Rex, by the time I was a kid and reading strips in the 60s, it was kind of all stories about somebody's running for senator and people in suits sitting around talking. And so I always thought it was boring and wanted nothing to do with it. So it's kind of ironic I would end up writing and drawing the strip, although it's a very different strip now. But it was eye-opening to see the material from the late 40s and early 50s and see just how wild some of the stuff was. Although I get a kick out of the fact that one of the major complaints I get is, well, we want more medical themed stories. We think this should be more focused on the medical stuff.
Just pictures of him looking under a microscope, because that's really exciting. Right. Just lots of this. Nurse, please hand me the next slide.
But it's always been a soap opera, and it's almost always love triangle stories. just over and over and over. It's, somebody, oh, I don't think my wife loves me anymore. I mean, what's the medical theme there? Please,
Right.
somebody please tell me. But then suddenly a guy comes down with polio and Rex cures him, which is crazy. That's a real thing in the strip. Rex finds a potential cure for polio.
Wow.
Do you remember what year that was?
That's, I think, 1950.
Wow.
Yeah.
And people also don't know that Nicholas Dallas created the 3 strips.
Yeah, Judge Parker, Rex Morgan, and Apartment 3G.
Wow.
Yeah, he had quite a deal going writing those 3 strips.
Yeah. Which I'm sure he was probably had a ghostwriter from the Third Day or something. But and where? And
I don't know. I think he wrote that stuff.
You think so? You think he wrote it all the way through?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I know that a lot of guys had. What was it? Al Cap's brother wrote a couple.
Right, Elliot Kaplan. He wrote Long Sam, which was one of the Al Cap strips. The Bob Lubbers drew.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of a gender reversal on Lil Abner. It was a big hillbilly gal instead of a big hillbilly guy. Beautifully drawn strip and very funny. And I would love somebody sometime to collect that, but I may be, hoping against hope there for that one. It's a little too obscure.
I have a question for you, Terry. Let's dig
Okay.
into the room.
That's why I'm here.
Make sure I have the right one here. So our good buddy J. Robert Deans, who's a fantastic cartoonist, and also is very loyal to our broadcasts. JRD says, when you took over Rex Morgan, did it take a while writing beats for a daily strip as opposed to monthly comics? Or had you been drawing dailies enough that it was a smooth transition for you? Thanks, JRD.
Okay, good question. Well, it was fairly smooth, but I don't know that it had anything to do with having worked in comic books and then shifting over to comic strips. It had to do with having been obsessed with comic strips from a very early age, and also having worked with Max Collins. Max Allen Collins co-created Ms. Tree, a long-running Private Eye series that we did together, and Wild Dog, short-lived superhero series for DC, a bunch of other things we did together. But I got to watch over his shoulder as he wrote the Dick Tracy strip for years, and saw what worked and what didn't, and how he did that job, and how the storytelling and how the writing worked. And plus obsessively reading, all the vintage newspaper strips I could get my hands on. Which wasn't as easy then as it is now, because now you can, go on Amazon and buy the complete Dick Tracy or the complete Lil Abner in various volumes.
Right.
But then the best source, say 1970s, there was a weekly newspaper called the Menominee Falls Gazette.
Yeah.
By the guys who originally did the Comics Reader. And this thing was like this 48-page tabloid newspaper, and every page was a full week of some story strip.
Wow.
Vintage and new and foreign. And I just ate that thing up every time it arrived in the mailbox, and that was my school. I just think I knew how to do it from day one. And I don't think there's that many people who do anymore. It's a really crazy...
And I also think...
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, it's also our age, because we're probably the last guys to come through the gate who were fans of comic strips.
Yeah.
Into the business, because we were fans of guys who were also fans of comic strips. Like, I was a fan of Al Williamson, and he did comic strips, and he was a fan of comic strips. And now people coming in after us are fans mostly of comic books. We were fans of comic books, but we still like comic strips. And our heroes, the guys we admired, to them, the Valhalla was getting to do a strip. That was the big thing. Like comics, like, man, who cares about Captain America? If I can draw Rex Morgan, if I can draw Judge Parker, that was like a legit thing. And back in the day, guys made mad money. I think that people have no idea today how much money
Mhm.
guys could make off a strip, even like a mediocre strip, right?
Oh,
You
absolutely.
could still make. I just read that Cartoon County book that John Cullen Murphy's son put out
Yeah, I want to read
last
that.
year, and he said what his father made in like 1960. And I did one of those Google thingies where they say in 1960, $1. Right, he was making $250,000 a
Yeah.
year
Yeah.
doing Big Ben Bolt,
Yeah.
which was not a top strip. That was like,
No, not at all.
you know, and
Wow.
he had a nice house in Connecticut where all the artists used to live and everything. And so that's why if you were working for $30 a page in Marvel, you drop that shit in a minute to go work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And people who are reading comics now have no idea of we're sort of ignorant, I think, in a way of our history when it comes to things like that.
So how did that happen? Was it because the information platform at the time was the newspaper? It was like newspaper and radio.
Yeah, there were just so many newspapers, and they were all hungry for material. Your major cities would have 4 or 5 newspapers; they wouldn't have just one.
Right.
And every small town had a newspaper, a daily newspaper, not a weekly paper. And so you start adding up all the weekly payments for those comic strips, and it really would add up.
And they actually had salesmen. They had salesmen who would go around and try to get the bulletin to drop one of the other strips and get their strip.
Yeah. Well, I remember seeing a newspaper article from the teens about Bud Fisher, who was the creator of Mutt and Jeff, who apparently did have ghosts take over his strip almost immediately. On some cruise with princesses, and it's just like this, and apparently early on, the syndicates hadn't figured out that they needed to do a 50-50 deal, and it was more like an agent-artist deal, and the syndicates were taking, 10-20%, and Bud was getting, 90 or 80.
Wow.
And so he was making like the kind of money major movie stars make off of this just kind of crummy comic strip, but hugely popular comic strip. So yeah, it was an extremely lucrative thing and very high class. And you look back, Al Cap was on the cover of Newsweek, Milton Caniff's on the cover of Time. These guys were major personalities. Not so much anymore. But I feel like I'm lucky. For one, I think I'm the old guy in the room today. I'm a little older than you, Mike. I'm considerably older than you, Jamar. And the classic adventure strip cartoonists were still working when I was a little kid. So Hal Foster was still drawing Prince Valiant, and Caniff was doing Canyon, and Roy Crane would draw the first couple weeks of a Buzz Sawyer story before turning it over to his ghosts. So I saw this, great stuff in the newspapers growing up, and loved that just as much as I loved the comic books that I got hooked on really early with Kirby and Ditko and Wood and those guys.
What was there a kind of I'm acting as the layman now because I know a lot about strips, but coming from this angle of the business, I never really had an angle on. Was there a period of time where you saw that shift from newspapers into different media? It wasn't comics, or was it more? Where did all these guys go, and when did the syndicate start kind of putting their thumb on everybody?
Into a watery grave.
Was it like the 60s? Was that it? Was it a little earlier than that? Was it the
70s, I think, is when things started to change. Well, the tone of newspaper strips started to change in the 50s when Peanuts and BC came along, because they were far simpler, and they signaled this stylistic change in comics. And the humor strips started really outstripping the story strips. Gotcha. And the story strips started fading pretty quickly, and we were left with just the major ones.
Right. And what you had going on too was that what you could only get in a story strip, now you could watch on TV.
True. True,
Mhm,
because
mhm.
when Dick Tracy and Little Orphan Annie were in their heyday,
Right.
there was no television. There was
Right.
radio,
Right.
and they
right,
were
right,
on the radio too.
right.
And
Yeah.
there were movies, and they did movie serials of those.
Mhm.
But yeah, 1930s through the 40s, you're a kid on Sunday and you get the Sunday paper, and there's a huge 1624 page comic section that you lay out in front of you on the floor, and you just see these big, beautiful adventure strips, and there's nothing like that now.
Yeah.
And
What are
again,
you doing? I have my big, beautiful Sunday strip right here. What are you talking about? I lay my face right on it. On lay down.
you
And
just
look at it.
see it printed, squashed panel by panel on the
Yeah.
web. That looks so good. Don't get me started. So it's just the medium changed, and newspapers changed, and
Society changed.
Yeah.
Everything,
we just don't have newspapers like we used to.
Yeah.
My
And they're
dad-
tiny.
Yeah. Well, like in Detroit, there was the Detroit News, and then there was the Detroit Free Press, and I'm sure there was probably a couple others. I don't know about Philly. There was the Inquirer, the Bulletin.
There was the Inquirer, the Bulletin. There might have been like one other thing, but there were a lot of kind of like neighborhood papers too. But the Bulletin was huge, and I remember when they shut down in the 80s. That was like you could hear the death rattle all over the city.
Well, as that started happening, then all the strips that were marginal, let's say the strips that were not Peanuts, the strips that were, Barney Google, right? That kind of strip lost too many clients, and they just sort of like they didn't renew the contracts. Like we talked to June on the podcast, and she and her husband Roy were doing Brenda Starr, and then like every year your contract gets a little bit less, a little bit less, because they did that with Apartment 3G, the other Nicholas Dallas strip, ended a couple of years ago. When the artist basically, I think they were keeping it alive for him. He was like an old guy in an old folks home or something. Looked like he was drawing it, like while he was having his applesauce. But that was his thing.
Yeah.
And when he was gone, that was it. There was not enough to keep it. There was not enough clients left.
Well, it's Frank Bowl. He was 90. And, the strip didn't look so good anymore, but he was a solid professional for years and ghosted a lot of strips and did a lot of book illustration and, was a good, solid cartoonist. But, at 90 to just still be doing, it was 6 days a week. It was just a daily strip. Still, I mean, I figure when I'm 90, I'll be lucky if I can put my socks on. So
I can't put my socks on now.
Even if the strip looked bad, I was still impressed that he was making it happen.
Yeah. Well, most. This is a profession that most people work really like right up until the very end. Very few guys.
It's because we're broke and we have no retirement plan.
Well, those old guys. The old guys.
Sorry to tell you that, people.
But now you have comic strips, but they're just all web-based. They're not about detectives anymore. They're not about the kind of things you would see in popular culture, right? So the comic strips was like the movies. If that's why the soaps became popular. They're trying to do something to reach the housewives. They like the drama. Oh, we'll make a soap opera. Now no one says. There's. Go ahead.
No, so this is also why the soap opera strips are never that popular with the comic book fans. There's a certain amount of crossover from the comic book fans to the adventure strips, where you have guys who like Captain America who also like Flash Gordon, but they're not going to make that jump to Rex Morgan because that was for the ladies. I mean, really, it was that attitude. That's for like my mom. I'm not going to read that.
So what about the romance comics?
Romance comics were for girls, and back when girls read comic books before the superheroes took over and it became a boys' club for too many years. And they sold millions of those things. those were huge sellers back in the 50s and even the early 60s. That's why they published them, because they sold.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's the segment of comics fandom that's comic book fandom, and specifically superhero comic book fandom, that thinks there's nothing outside that,
and is not even really interested in looking at anything.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Not interested in humor strips, not interested in strips about everyday people, or even crime comics, that was one of the tough things that we set ourselves up with when Max and I were doing Ms. Tree. Here we were, a couple of untested guys in the business, trying to do this crime comic with a female character, and we weren't doing cheesecake or pinup stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How stupid were we? That was a tough row to hoe. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. When we were putting that feature together, we literally had this conversation. We looked at each other and said, well, what should she look like? I mean, so basically, the late husband is pretty much Mike Hammer. So, so she's going to be this variation on Velda, his secretary. How about we just make her look like Betty Page? Wouldn't that be cool? Nah. This was 2 years before Rocketeer.
Wow.
Nah, that's just, we don't want to do pinup and cheesecake.
Let's make her look like Hazel.
Yeah,
right?
Well, we didn't quite go that far.
Hey, but Terry, I have a Ms. Tree question from the room.
Sure.
So our good buddy JRD comes back again with a...
Is he the only one watching?
No, we've got a full house right now.
Okay, all right.
But like I said, he front-loaded the chat with questions as he does his homework. JRD says, while being credited as the artist, Miss Tree was a collaboration with you and Max Collins. How did that work between the two of you? Was it Marvel style, or did you offer suggestions during or after he gave you scripts? So, like, what was your workflow?
He wrote full scripts. What's funny is he just would write them out in longhand on typing paper, but with the panels broken down. But he would write the captions and the dialogue, and occasionally a note as to what's happening if it wasn't obvious what was happening. Mm-hmm. And luckily I could read his handwriting. But we talked about stories, and I made some story suggestions, but he was the writer on that. Gotcha. I can't claim that I co-plotted the stories or anything. He was the writer on that feature.
And there's one more, but I'll keep that for later. But okay. You know what? This one's kind of going back to the strips for a second. Michael Cooper, who's been hanging out with us for a couple of weeks now, hey Mike, says, hi guys, lots of knowledge here regarding the strips. Any recommendations for classic or historically relevant strips that have been reprinted? Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
Well, my favorite of the classic strips are Prince Valiant by Hal Foster, just because it's so damn gorgeous and it's good stories. Mm-hmm. I'm also fond of Lil Abner, even though Al Cap was not the nicest human being. Mm-hmm. I think Dick Tracy is a heck of a read. It's crazy. It's crazy and wonderful. Mm-hmm. And Little Orphan Annie is surprisingly involving and just really grabs you as far as the storytelling is concerned. Mm-hmm. But gosh, there's so much stuff that's been reprinted, more obscure stuff like a Barnaby, which is wonderful, mm-hmm. Or Cisco Kid, which is just gorgeous. If I could draw one panel in my life that looked anywhere close to the quality of a single panel of a Cisco Kid strip, I would be a happy man.
I would say that Salinas was equal to Raymond or Foster as far as his draftsman. And in fact, in some ways, when it came, I think, to drawing horses, he was actually better.
Oh, yeah.
They're just amazing. Williamson used to have literally a stack like that behind his desk, right behind his chair, that we would go through and look at when I shared his studio. And the amazing drawing that guy did. All this amazing split hair and dry brush stuff that didn't even reproduce well. It was so beautifully done, And evidently, the reason why some of those strips were there is because he didn't want to pay the postage to have them shipped back to Argentina.
Wow. So that's why originals were fairly easy to find for a while.
Well, one of the reasons why there is so much good stuff,
Yeah,
is that Williamson figured out how to bribe some guy at King Features, and he went in there and literally took a garbage bag
wow.
and would just stuff in there.
Yeah.
So that's why the bridge still exists. That's why most of the early Prince Valiants still exists, because he
got him out of there.
He swiped them, because he said when he would go in there, you would look over in the corner of the window, and there would be a Flash Gordon sopping up the water from something that was leaking. So they would basically burn them or throw them out. They did not in any way at all. Now those things go for millions of dollars, the top strips. I'm sure something like that would go for a couple. And people like Spielberg and Lucas have been hunting that stuff for years, right? The high-end guys, high-end Hollywood guys like that. But the syndicates did not value the original art at all, and neither did most of the artists. No, Foster would cut up. If you go on Heritage, where they sell a lot of the original art, sometimes you just see a panel, and if somebody would write him, "Dear Mr. Foster, you are my favorite," he'd cut up a panel and he'd mail it to him. So you see,
easier to mail one of those panels than to mail an entire Sunday page.
Right.
Which is, the size of a barn. It was the early ones. Yeah, but value on this stuff, even comic book art, wasn't that high when I started getting into. I started collecting artwork mid 1970s.
Really, it was probably pretty cheap, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could pick up a Peanuts daily for $35, and I did. I had a nice one. Bought out of a drawer from the house of a syndicate editor. I had it. Well, my sob story is that I bought a Ditko Spider-Man Doc Ock fight page for $125. And this was probably 74, 75.
Wow.
And I kept it, I think maybe about 10 years. And then I sold it for about $150 to buy an Enoch Bowles pinup painting. Which I then kept for about another 10 years and sold for 10 times what I paid for it, which is now worth 10 times what I sold it for. But the Ditko page, last time I saw it, was sold at auction at Heritage for $37,000. Now, this is a piece of art that hung on the wall in my bedroom when I still lived with my mom and dad in high school. And here's the crazy story that nobody knows. I've never admitted this before. I was a high school kid, right? And it always kind of bothered me that the art was black and white. And at the time, they made this clear color Zipatone. So I cut the Zipatone and put it on the page. So Spider-Man would be blue and red, and Doc Ock would be green and orange. And so when I removed it, there was one tiny little bit of ink that came up. So I touched it up. So that original is now a Ditko Beatty original.
I love it.
For anybody, for whoever owns it, whoever paid the $37,000 for it, it's worth an extra nickel because I worked on it. Yeah.
Wow. The vengeful ghost.
But it was, you thought, well, I could get another one. This stuff's out. What big deal? It's $125, which was not spare change for me at the time. I mean, that was a serious amount of money.
No, yeah. I mean, $100 as a teenager was like $1,000 now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But still, it seemed like, well, yeah, I'll get another one someday. No. Nope.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know about that kind of like underground hobby of a lot of cartoonists of collecting original pages or strips. Or I remember before they started collecting all these very sexy bound books of strips. Like I remember a lot of guys were I'm kind of switching my story here, clipping newspaper strips, right? Mm-hmm. Like people had Gasoline Alley collections, going back years, and then they started reprinting them, and people were like, "Shit, what am I supposed to do with all these things? I've been clipping all these," because they weren't really, reprinting that stuff in that way. But I also know that a lot of you guys would like not trade, but like sell strips or original pages back and forth to each other, which I always thought was
Al
really,
did that.
Yeah.
Al did that.
Oh, a lot of the
Winston used
cartoonists,
to do that. In
a lot of the
fact,
cartoonists traded work with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd see their
he had
studios
on
and
the
see
back
on
of
the
them
wall,
was on-
stuff by all the other cartoonists.
And Al, and downstairs downstairs in his studio, he had a section that had all these foil bricks, looked like billions of foil brick, and I'm like, what are that? And when he was a kid, he would clip all the stuff and then he put them in those foils. So he had tons of old comic strips that he had been clipping since he was a kid.
Wow.
And he had them in. So that's why he had copies of stuff. He was like the original comic strip fan, like the original geek, because he loved that stuff. It was so important to him that he started collecting that stuff.
Yeah.
When he was a kid, when he came up from Bogota to America, and he brought stuff with him, and he started collecting stuff. Like he and Forey Ackerman were like the two guys that like early on would collect stuff, would clip stuff, and a lot of guys didn't do that. So he actually had I think it was a Hal Foster Sunday that on the back said "on loan from Wally Wood."
Wow.
That's great.
So I think what would happen is guys would get it and then they would trade it. I'll trade you this one. I'll trade you that one. I'll trade you. They would trade it back and forth, like the Flegel gang, like the Frazetta and all those guys. And there were certain groups of people who were really into the adventure strips, right? Like he had a whole set of.
Hi, Kitty.
He had a whole set of Johnny Hazard, the syndicate proofs that he had gotten over the years.
Wow.
He used to love that strip. So it's different now because we could technically probably make a reprint of our stuff, but I don't know whether there would really be. You could do a small press. I don't think that there's the readership of the strip would be the kind of people that would want to buy it. I don't know.
No, well, that's the thing about the soap opera strips is we have readers. We have lots of readers. They're not collectors.
Right.
It's a very different thing. It's one of the reasons that I draw the strip completely digitally because there's no market for the original art. When I was drawing Phantom, I would pencil them digitally and print that out in blue line, but I would ink it by hand so there was an original because there was a market for the artwork, man. Folks in Australia and all around the world, not so much America, but but elsewhere, there was a market for it. There were collectors for that. So the adventure strips still appeal to collectors, but man, the soap opera strips have very, very loyal readers, but they do not have the collecting gene. Yeah. They're not part of that group.
And I think that the people that have been reading it, like when I first took over Judge Parker, the writer who used to write Terry's strip, Woody Wilson, said, "Well, we're gonna age the youngest daughter, Sophie. We want her to be 16 because she looked like she was 12 for 20 years, right?" So she finally went through puberty, and I remember right away there was some old lady who had been reading the strip since 1953, and wrote it "How dare you give Sophie boobs?"
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Well, yeah, you've always got that. I mean, I started quite a fuss here lately when I pretty much said today's Rex and June Morgan are not the Rex and June Morgan of 1948 or even 1968 or 1988. They are modern day versions of the characters that you've read about, and those stories happen, but they happen to some other version of Rex and June. And this started when I wrote the story about the Morgans moving. and then finding like some old comic books hidden in their attic. And some people said, well, there was nobody who lived in their house before that. They had that house built for themselves, specially. I'm like, well, I went back and read the oldest story available in the files from Comics Kingdom, and it was about them moving into the house.
How old was that?
I don't know, 70s maybe. And it was about them moving into the house, and there was not a single mention about it having been specially built for them. Now, maybe there was a mention of it before the moving in sequence, but there was no mention of it after. So I couldn't possibly know this. Well, how can I be stuck trying to deal with continuity from strips I don't even have access to? So I just decided, okay, that stuff happened to Earth 2, Rex and June. We're moving on. This is new. These are new characters. It's a new day. We're moving on. And I recently, and this was because of COVID-19, I recently did a story that was a flashback to how my Rex and June met. Because, COVID-19 started happening, and I'm like, how do I deal with this in the strip? I have no idea what's going to happen 2-3 months from now. Flashback story while I get all that figured out. And original Rex and June met in 1948 when Rex walked into his new office in Glendale, which was the original name of the town at some point, and I've never been able to figure out when it changed to Glenwood. And there was June, who had been hired in advance to be his nurse. And they just meet in one panel, and that's it. There's no story.
Right.
And so I changed this up to, Rex is the new doctor. He's at the hospital. June is already working there as a nurse. They meet, romance ensues, etc. And I got all of these comments from people about, well, that's not how they met. And I'm like, it's not the same characters, guys.
That's not canon.
It's not. Yeah, we're starting over, and I don't know why that is so hard for some people to accept. But the longtime readers sometimes get very fussy about this stuff.
Well, the thing is that it's even worse with the Phantom, right? Because you have the same guy being the same guy who fought Nazis,
yes,
who helped Mercury astronauts who got lost, right?
Yeah, it's still the same guy.
Right, now has a cell phone and still has a 15-year-old daughter who's been around since the early 80s.
Yeah. Well, and then try to think about the legacy Phantoms before that, and the dates they lived and the dates they died and the periods they lived through. Well, how does that affect that? I mean, that's just completely messed up. And what's crazy about that in the Phantom is it's built into the concept that the costume gets passed along to the next generation.
Right. It's all set up.
We should have been on the 4th Phantom by now, but they're so afraid to change anything. They just won't do it.
Yeah.
So he's the 21st Phantom now and forever, even if the strip is going 100 years from now, and it makes no sense. Yeah, but likewise, Dick Tracy. I mean, Dick Tracy started in 1931 and was involved in fighting saboteurs in World War II, and now he's still a cop. Come on,
he's supposed to be a machine now.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's hard for you to deal with this stuff in one way because you're trying to make stories that are current, that appeal to current people with characters that were created and existed from 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And when people created these characters, they had no idea. We're not thinking, 2020 they'll still be drawing or writing any stories with any of these characters. And Marvel and DC still have that problem too.
Oh, absolutely.
Like Peter Parker is, he's an old guy now, right? He would be at least in his 70s, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. If they aged him in real time, sure.
Right, yeah. So, and he's met every president. The Thing had a Beatles wig. So we went through the same thing.
And Reed Richards was in World War II. Yeah.
Right.
My dad was in
Well,
World
he
War
doesn't
II.
age because he's made out of rubber.
Yeah, my dad was in World War II.
Doesn't
If my
age.
dad, if my dad were alive, he'd be 100 years old this year. So, the passage of time with these characters is just crazy. You've just at some point you have to say we're doing a modern version.
But they don't really, but like you said, the fans have a hard time dealing with you trying to access the story. I mean, advance the story.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk real quick before, because I want to get into your origin a little bit, Terry. What you did.
I was bitten by a radioactive spider.
There you go. Good night, folks. I want to talk a little bit more about the internet. So I know just through you guys and some of the other people we know who do comic strips, daily strips, that there's a toxic cesspool called the comment section.
Oh, God.
On a lot of the kind of online syndicate websites. Can you maybe talk about how you guys as creators deal with the comments from that from those people, and maybe do a little bit of a setup, because it just sounds like, well, what could go wrong on a comment board?
Well, the problem is that the comments section, and particularly for the story strips, particularly for the soap opera strips, have been taken over by people who are not fans of the strip, but are just there to make fun of it. And I think that's very unfortunate, and they've pretty much driven out anybody who actually likes the strips. Now, I would like to be able to interact with these people and, and answer questions and be a part of a connection with the readers, but these aren't the readers. I get emails and I've talked to real readers, and I get very positive comments from those folks, people who've been touched by some story that I did because it's connected with some illness that a family member had, or related to their experience somehow. But these guys are just there to, make a dirty joke or impress each other with how mean they can be. At my first strip, and I hadn't read the comment section prior, I wasn't paying any attention to that. But when my first strip appeared, I thought, well, let's see what they're saying. And the first thing that I read was, who's drawing this thing now? A monkey? And I thought, well, that's not nice. Maybe I shouldn't read these. And so for the longest time, I didn't.
Yeah.
And then I talked to the syndicate and I started reading them just to flag stuff, to get the nastiest stuff removed.
Yeah.
But what I've had to come to understand is that most of the complaints these guys make are based on false assumptions. I'm trying to think of an example, but very often they will say, oh, here's one. Somebody was complaining, how is it that little Michael Morgan, who's one of the Morgan's two kids, they have a naturally born kid and an adopted kid that are the same age as Michael and Johnny. How can little Michael be blonde-haired when Rex and June have dark hair? Michael has dark hair. Their adopted son, Johnny, has blonde hair. He has blonde hair because he's adopted. And so I can tell the two apart. And also, there's a lot of complaining about, oh, the story's taking forever, when the story will be 2 weeks into it. Right. And it's just a lack of understanding of how comics work.
Yeah,
so literally,
it's a very different audience online, right, than read.
Yeah. But I also think there's a lot of people reading it online who read the strip and then they go on with their lives like normal humans. Right. I don't know what possesses somebody to show up to post a nasty comment on a comic strip comment section every day.
Multiple times.
And literally are guys who do multiple comments. Yeah. And not just on my strip, but on Mike's and other strips as well. I just don't get it. And I think it's really kind of sad.
Well, if you read any study on trolls online, Comics Kingdom is just one little teeny small part of all that, because every message board, if you went to the Philadelphia Inquirer right now and you saw there was a story, and you go down to the comic section, you're like, oh my God.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, it's just part of our toxic culture that we have developed online now that is pretty much universal on any message board. You know, it could be a Disney message board. DC shut their message board. A lot of places have gotten rid of their message
Yeah.
boards because basically it's just people showing up to tell, you know, dick and fart jokes and call each other bad words. You know, it's like part of the ironic thing about it to me is that we have a lot of things that we cannot do as strip artists, right? Ways subject matters we can't draw, things we can't show. But if you go to the comment section of this, people are talking about the characters all having sex with each other.
Oh yeah.
About whether women are on their period. I mean, all kinds of inappropriate stuff to the characters who are minors. Fathers having sex with their daughters. All that kind of stuff, which of course we could never do on the strips. And I think that
Nor would we want to.
Right. But I think eventually the previous editor I used to complain to all the time. And I remember the original, the Woody Wilson, who was writing the strip at the time, right when I first started, told me, never go and read the comic section because it's just, you know, the hive of scum and villainy, as Obi-Wan would say. And he's true. And I noticed that Judge Parker was always worse, like Terry said. The Phantom was better, but it's actually also become worse. And I think what happened was the older version, the original version of the message board, which has since become redesigned, the people that used to be on that message board and would make comments about this stuff, you never see those people anymore. So basically, you have a crowd of people who are playing to each other, and the strip is just a means to an end. So I can write a weird limerick. There are people who come in and will write a limerick about.
I've seen those Judge Parker limericks. Yeah,
probably 90 minutes trying to rhyme something with Judge Parker with the lyrics from the Fall Guy theme, right? And I don't understand that. That is just so bizarre. And I mean, I know they're the type of people who, I call them fingernail counters. They notice, like, I saw you drew the fingernail on the first three fingers on the Phantom's right hand when he was punching, but you didn't draw the one on the pinky. Lay it down on the job, Manley.
Oh, the joy, the glee that some people take in finding errors in our work is just astounding. They're just thrilled to see if we've made a mistake.
Yeah.
And I get a giggle out of the times when I know there's a mistake in the strip and they don't see it. Most of the mistakes they point out are not mistakes. There's something intentional, or it's just not an error.
Yeah.
So it's kind of ridiculous. Actually, today the daily strips appear in color online, and I don't do the color on the dailies. I color the Sunday, but I don't do the dailies. And today's strip and yesterday's too shows my old my nonagenarian cartoonist character, horrible Hank Harwood, who I think we may see later, at the drawing board, and he's got a page that he's working on, and the colorist colored what should be a black and white drawing full color. Okay, that's an error. That's a mistake. Not a single mention of that. But all sorts of griping about, are we going to have to read about these guys for another week? And it's like, yeah, you are.
It's a weird, unfortunate circumstance that these people have found community in just razzing and raising other people's work.
Unhappy people.
Yeah.
Using our work as fodder, but again, I'm sure that there's people there's a community of unhappy NASCAR people and unhappy, soap fans and unhappy Star Trek fans, and I mean, there's just I also think that ability to just fart out a comment without there ever being, you don't have to really think about it. You just write some little thingy and you send it.
Right.
In the old days, you get your typing paper out. You'd have to type it, "Dear Mr. Schultz, once again." And then you'd have to stamp. You'd have to have the guy's address, number one.
Way too much work.
Just to write to Hal Foster, put a stamp on it, and like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, he gets a package. So I think that there is that, because I mean, even when in comics there is a real toxic side, as we know, to fandom.
Oh, absolutely.
It was not there when we were fans, when we were starting out. I mean, you may not have liked something, but you didn't carry on to like the nth degree.
No, well, and there wasn't a forum in which to do so.
Right.
But yeah, I remember Max when he was writing Dick Tracy, said he would occasionally get a letter, scribbled in crayon on butcher paper, just like, I don't like the violence in your comic. And Chet Gould apparently had told Max that he got a lot of letters from prison. So I guess the prisoners have nothing else to do. So most of his mail was from prisoners.
So Terry, speaking of prison, and this is the second part of my
I haven't spent any time. Never been.
The second part of my internet question, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
But one thing that I adore about you is that you've turned into kind of like a fake cartooning sales on eBay vigilante.
Well, it's just something that I noticed that was really making me angry, is that there were a number of eBay sellers who were just consistently selling really bad forged cartoon art. And some guys were clearly like earning their living off of this.
Yeah.
And, most of the artists they would imitate would be guys who are dead and so, can't defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also thinking about the people who are getting ripped off. Now, I will occasionally run into somebody, in comics fandom who says, well, if they're so stupid that they can't tell, they deserve to get ripped off. And I'm like, no, blaming the victim. And people who are smart enough to be able to recognize these things as forgeries aren't going to go near them, but their grandma or grandpa who wants to buy them a graduation present, who don't know any better, are the people who are going to get stiffed. And then what happens when grandma and grandpa give that gift to, grandson? Is he going to say, oh, you bought me a forgery and let's go fight this on eBay? No, he's just going to say, oh, that's so sweet, grandma and grandpa, and then go home and say, damn it. They got ripped off. But eBay won't do anything about these guys because they insist that you either be the owner of the intellectual property that's being ripped off, or you be some sort of expert. And apparently, me being a lifelong cartoonist and original art collector and being able to tell a forgery from a real drawing like that doesn't make me an expert. But I figure if I can spread the word enough, we can lower the sales for some of these people enough that maybe they'll stop trying.
Well, they had that,
but it's all over.
They had that in fine art too. They had all those people making the fake dolly.
Oh yeah,
Salvador Dali stuff. I mean, there's a big problem in the fine art world with forgeries, because there's a lot of people who have forgeries and spend a lot of money on forgeries and don't want to have to eat that money. So they're going to insist. I mean, to this day, they still have a Rembrandt that's a Rembrandt one day, and then some other experts in some place look at it and go, no, that was one of his students. And then later on, somebody goes, no, that wasn't one of his students. That was the hand of the master. So with art, there's a lot of stuff like that, especially in comics, because comics, probably more than anything else, has the least amount of oversight or experts. You don't have a guy. I mean, they do now, that somebody at Heritage, but they don't have people that are experts on, Charles Schultz. They don't have guys that are and make their living being flown, in a Learjet across the ocean to look at 4 Snoopy heads drawn on the back of a napkin, that kind of thing, right? Which you do for fine art, but in comics you don't. So it really is buyer beware, because I've seen a lot of the stuff that Terry is marked, and the thing is when you look at it, if you know anything at all, you go, obviously that's like somebody doing a really shaky drawing, not even close, not even close.
Well, I mean, they do. One place I'd love to visit is the Billy Ireland Cartoon Museum in Ohio State. They have a huge archive of original art, and like you guys were saying, I'm sure there's experts out there, but nobody's calling them to CNN to talk about the state of the comic strip.
Well, the thing about the eBay auctions, though, is there is fine art that's forged as well.
Sure.
I mean, it's very typically it's Moreau, it's Picasso, it's Dali, Keith Haring is a big one, because apparently these are easy to fake.
Yeah.
And in comics, it's Schultz, it's Bruce Timm for some reason. There's a lot, and then there's things like Dr. Seuss and Tim Burton. You'll see a lot of those fakes. Jack Kirby a lot now.
A lot of Kirby too.
Yeah, and they'll just be awful, and they're always just single character drawings. Oh, Hergé, Tintin drawings.
Oh yeah. What about Watterson? I guess most people know that there's not a lot of Watterson.
Oh yeah, tons of Watterson drawings, and there are not that many real Watterson drawings out on the market. Those are legitimately rare. He just didn't do specialty drawings for people at the drop of a hat. That stuff's not out there, and if it is, it's not going to be on eBay for $100 opening bid. So it's just maddening to see this stuff listed, and also too, how quickly some of these guys would jump on forging work by an artist after they died. I mean, it was like Rich Buckler died. Rich Buckler fakes, just like that. The only time I know one of these guys got shut down, and it wasn't a permanent shutdown, was that there was a Dick Tracy fan who got involved and got the Chester Gould's estate involved when there was a guy who was one of the longtime forgers, started doing a series of Chet Gould panels. And they got him shut down with the comic art for quite a while, and he moved on to, autographed sports memorabilia, which I'm sure was all legit too.
Right. I forget that the sports memorabilia. That's such a racket. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd be very, very wary of any autographed items you find on eBay. The only autographed item I bought on eBay was I bought an autographed photo of Al Cap that the buyer didn't know was a real autograph.
Oh wow!
The seller didn't know.
It was like a reverse. You knew what he had.
Yeah, yeah. I just had this. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, I think that's a real signature on that photo. I don't think that's a printed photo. And I got it, and it is indeed a real signature. You can feel the the ink on top of the photo. So that one was legit, but that's just because the guy didn't know what he had.
Mm-hmm. I had a question. I was leading up to this, and now I forgot. Here it is. So, Terry, Dennis Lynch, who's watching on YouTube, asks, Terry,
Dennis, I'm unfriending you right now.
Has anyone tried selling forgeries of your Rex art on eBay?
No, I haven't tried selling my Rex art on eBay. No, there's no market for the Rex Morgan art on eBay or elsewhere. I think we've established this. Dennis is a longtime comics fan and been involved in comics fandom and science fiction fandom for years, and is a fellow Iowan, and he's trolling us.
Oh, trolling. Well, thanks for watching, Dennis. I appreciate it. Terry, how you feeling?
Doing good.
Good. Where's the time go?
That's a big question, Jamar.
Yeah, I don't think we have time.
As a 62-year-old cartoonist who doesn't know how the hell he got here this fast, I don't know where the time goes.
I would love if you could give us a little bit of a dive into how you got started in comics.
And the strips, because that's a different, that's like, for our generation, it was not something that people kind of sought to, or were there that many opportunities.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I was comics addicted from a very early age. I had three older brothers who were bringing home Marvel and DC comics in the mid 1960s. So I was started to read Spider-Man with issue 23 or something, and Fantastic Four with issue 30 something. So I wasn't there at the very beginning, but I got in pretty early. And like I said earlier, the great adventure strip cartoonists were still in the newspaper, so I was hooked. And then add in, the Fleischer Popeye cartoons on TV every afternoon, and I was just hopeless. I didn't, I couldn't be anything but a cartoonist. And was very interested in being a newspaper strip cartoonist from early on. It wasn't just comic books. Either one would have worked fine for me, but it was the strips I was thinking about to begin with. And I grew up in this little town in Iowa called Muscatine. My father was an English teacher there. And one of his students, a guy who's about 10 years older than me, was this kid named Al Collins, who people know now as Max Allen Collins, a mystery writer, a grand master in the Mystery Writers of America. And he published his first books when I was a teenager. There were these crime novels, paperback crime novels. One of the characters in them was a would-be cartoonist. And so there was all this comic book stuff in the books. And I'm thinking, what? I thought only I knew these things. And so I contacted him and we got to know each other. But there was 10 years difference between us. He was already teaching at the local community college while I'm still in school. But he taught an adult ed film criticism course. And basically this was go see the latest movie at the mall theaters and meet at the Pizza Hut afterward and discuss it. That's what the course was. And though I was still in high school, I managed to sign up for this thing and, would go hang out with he and his wife, Barb, and the other members of the class who started drifting off as the weeks went by. And it ended up with, I just ended up being like his little buddy, Robin to his Batman, hanging around. And he had an original art collection and I'd begged to come over and look at it. And there's a Prince Valiant and Dick Tracy strips on the wall. And at some point we just decided, well, when my work gets good enough, we'll try to do some comics thing together. And
Terry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Was that the first time you'd seen original pages?
Yeah. And it was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Absolutely mind-blowing to see the stuff in the flesh, as it were. And so, like I said, I just started hanging around this guy, being annoying, I'm sure. But we talked about working on something together. And then he got the Dick Tracy strip gig in a roundabout way. That had to do with his being a mystery writer and also having been a big Dick Tracy fan. And so, we were thinking, okay, well, when Rick Fletcher ever retires, maybe I can sneak in there and do that. But we also thought, well, let's try to sell something new. And the first thing we tried was a revival of Little Orphan Annie, because at the time it was in reruns. They were reprinting old Harold Gray strips from the 40s or the 30s, actually. But the play had come out on Broadway, the musical, which was a big hit. And we thought, they're not going to let the strip linger in reruns. They're going to do a new version. And so we did a couple weeks and he wrote a story synopsis and we pitched it and we thought we had the gig. We had a little meeting and they liked what they saw and they sent me home to do promotional art for the salesman, And I thought, I got a newspaper strip. I'm going to draw Little Orphan Annie. And then we didn't hear from them. And then they announced Leonard Starr was going to be doing Little Orphan Annie. And I thought, well, okay, I can understand that decision. Hire the 20-year-old kid who doesn't know what he's doing yet, or the longtime pro. So then we tried a couple other things. We did this feature we called the Comics Page that was for weekly small town tabloid newspapers, and it was 6 different comics features. And they were all imitations of stuff. There was an imitation Archie that was basically just the girls, Betty and Veronica, and I did an imitation Peanut strip, and we even ripped off They'll Do It Every Time by Jimmy Hatlow. We call that How Come Is It? That's my favorite title on the strip. But one of the features was this Minute Mystery. It was Mike Mist's Minute Mystery.
I love it.
Now, the Chicago Reader bought the strip just to run that feature. They didn't run any of the rest of the stuff, but they ran the Minute Mystery.
Mm-hmm.
At a Chicago con, Dean Mullaney picks up the Chicago Reader and sees this Minute Mystery strip by the guy who writes Dick Tracy. And he gets a hold of Max and says, "Do you have enough to make a book?" And Max says, "Well, we have a year's worth. We can do a 54-page comic book. That's all we've got, because the feature only lasted a year, because we only had about half the clients we needed to really make it work." So he publishes this Minute Mystery collection. Still waiting on my paycheck for that one. And then a couple months later calls Max and says, "Well, I'm doing this magazine called Eclipse, and I'd like to do a detective feature. Do you think you and Terry would like to do something for it?" And Max made up Ms. Tree on the phone.
Wow.
In that conversation with Dean, and pitched it, and called me up and said, "Okay, start figuring out the character design on this thing." Well, then we did Ms. Tree for 11 years. And we went from Eclipse to Aardvark Vanaheim to Renegade Press to DC. And it's still, hey, hang on a second. Here we go.
Hold on, I'll give you the screen. You're going to show it.
Oh, here we go.
Oh,
there we have. Being collected by, Hard Case Crime and Titan Books now, at long last. So that led to my comic book career. And Ms. Tree led to Wild Dog. And then Wild Dog was not a huge success. And I ended up becoming an inker. Sort of just oddly. I knew, now the Batman cartoon show was running and was a big success and was being merchandised up the wazoo. Mm-hmm. You could not walk in a store and not see a dozen pieces of merchandise without Batman on it at that point. And I knew they were looking for guys to do the merchandising art. So I did some sample drawings and sent them off to the merchandising guys and spent the extra stamp, as long as it was, and sent off a copy to the Batman editors. And I got a call and said, Rick Burchett is going to take 6 months off to get Superman Adventures going. Would you like to ink Batman Adventures for 6 months? And I said, yes. And that turned into 11 years on the various Batman cartoon titles until the editor on Batman Brave and Bold somehow lost my phone number. And I was done. But that was the comic book career. And somewhere in there, I ended up drawing the Return to Perdition graphic novel, which is really kind of the last thing I did for DC. And that's a frustrating story in and of itself, because after Max and I did Wild Dog and we were looking for a new project, we pitched Road to Perdition to DC as a Collins Beatty project. And the editors said, well, Ms. Tree and Wild Dog really didn't set the world on fire. Terry's busy inking Batman. And I said, okay, all right. They want to do the project, but they don't want me. That's okay. Go ahead and do it. And Max did it with Richard Piers Rayner in a beautiful book that, again, did not set the world on fire. So there it was. And then a year later, that book ended up on Steven Spielberg's desk. And a couple of years later, it's a movie with Paul Newman and Tom Hanks. So at that point, it kind of hurt. But I didn't get to draw that. But I ended up drawing one of the sequels, so that was okay. But that was the comic book career.
Wow.
And it kind of dried up after that. I inked a couple issues of Batman Brave and Bold when they got behind schedule, because I had become that guy they went to when they got into trouble.
You were the fireman.
I became the fireman, which was a bad thing to be. Oh, you're good and reliable. We'll hire you when we're in trouble, but we won't give you another monthly series. Right. Which is one of the really rotten things about the comic book business. But again, there it is. And the strips happened. Well, Phantom happened when Eduardo Barreto passed away. He was drawing the Sunday strip. And I heard through the pipeline, largely from Tom Smith, who was coloring it, who had colored it for a while. I don't think it was coloring Eduardo. that they needed somebody to draw the Sunday, and I felt weird about it. And I remember talking to some of my cartoonist friends, and I think Mike was one of them, who just, encouraged me and said, somebody's going to draw it, may as well be you. And so I sent a sample drawing off to Brendan Burford, who was the editor at the time. And he contacted me and said, well, I like this. Well, I'll give you a Sunday page to draw. And you don't have the job, but this is like a tryout. We'll see how it works out. And I said, well, when do you need it by? And they needed it like in a couple days. And I thought, well, geez, I've got other things I got to do. I don't think I can do that. And then I realized I just better do that. I'll just make it happen. And so I did. And then they sent me the script for the next couple weeks. And then they sent me the script for the next couple months. And then at some point I called and said, Brendan, do I have the job? Oh yeah, you're the guy. I said, okay, thanks for letting me know.
What happened is the first day when he says, you don't have the job, and he took off he went, we found somebody. But we're not telling him yet. Oh, no. You. Yeah.
So, and here's the Phantom, he's the first costumed hero character in comics, character I read about in comic books and read in the newspaper when I was a kid. What a kick, and it has a great history, and it led to wonderful things for me. I mean, the Phantom fans were great. They flew me to Australia for 2 weeks and treated me like a king, and my Lord, I've never been treated like that at a convention or anywhere in my life. It was just fantastic. And the food's real good. This is what I tell you about Australia. Man, the food was good, except for an American diner I went to. American style diner. I had a lousy hamburger. But and that was a treat. And then Phantom led to Rex. Just one day Brendan called me and said, well, Graham's done. He's drawn it for 14 years. He's tired. He wants to move on. And we need somebody who can draw Rex Morgan. Do you think you can do that? And what Brendan didn't know, and I may be speaking out of turn here, but I'll say it. I had penciled a month's worth of the strip for Graham. I'd ghosted a month's worth of it 6 or 7 months prior.
Wow.
So I'd already drawn the darn thing. So yeah, of course I can draw this. And the other thing, I also was told that they felt that the writer was probably going to be moving on soon, that he was getting close to retirement. And I thought, well, okay, if I can hang on, maybe I can convince them to let me take over the writing when he's gone. And that took a little work. And I kept writing story outlines of where I would take the story, what I would do with the strip. And eventually, they decided, okay, it's time for us to move on. And they kind of, I think, reluctantly gave me the writing gig. And, that's history now. I'm the guy. They let me do it. They changed my dialogue once so far. I couldn't use the word moron. They didn't like me having a character call his friend moron.
Oh, that's way too sensitive. Yeah.
Yeah, apparently.
I have a question.
The morons will be upset.
Yeah, well,
Terry, JRD asked, and I have a couple other questions, and then I want to go to your demo. While you've worked at a broad range of genres within comics, I'm guessing mystery noir is your favorite. Is there a detective from the 20s or 40s, literature or film, you would love to do a comic of?
No, but I'd like to see artists better than me do a nice version of that, maybe. Somebody else do that. It sounds like just way too much work.
It is.
And as much as I love that stuff, listen, okay, I have to say this. I am very aware of where I stand in the pantheon of cartoonists. I'm not up here with Alex Raymond. I'm about maybe George Tuska. I'm a solid professional. I'm good at what I do, but I'm never going to draw a panel as beautiful as a Stan Drake or a Leonard Starr panel at the top of their game. But, I got a slick line. I think I do character well. I think I tell a story well. And so those are my strengths. But for something like, a film noir comic, you're going to need somebody who has a bit more of a handle on the Alex Toth, Jordi Bernay school of drawing than I do.
Mm-hmm. So there's another question there's so many questions for the room. I'm very happy with the room. Thank you, room. You're making me proud tonight. Another pencil to pencil pencileer, as I like to call them. Eternity forever. I have to say it like that. It's in my contract. Asks, have any of you thought about doing your own creator-owned projects by crowdfunding when work dried up? So I think that's an interesting question coming from a place from when you guys were doing like mainstream work into maybe dabbling into self-publishing or a whole other hustle altogether. So if that was a thing that was available, had you considered anything like that when you're in between gigs? I'd like to hear from both of you.
Yeah, if it had been available when I was, doing comic book work, yeah. Although, I mean, Ms. Tree was a creator-owned property between Max and me.
Right.
Max and I have always said it's frustrating that we didn't do Wild Dog ourselves because we had such huge sales in the Quad Cities area where that was based that we would have gotten rich just off of Quad City sales alone. But those sales weren't enough for DC to make it a successful book.
Gotcha.
Although if we had self-published it and it didn't have the DC label on it, maybe it wouldn't have attracted the attention. So there's like a catch-22 there. But yeah, certainly I think doing that sort of thing is a smart idea. It's the sort of thing I told my students they should look at doing when I was teaching at MCAD. But I also think it's the sort of thing that would be better served by younger artists with a more current worldview than creaky old me at this point. I mean, right now, I think I'm the guy to be writing and drawing Rex Morgan because, retired people need something to read too. It's the AARP crowd. They got to have something to entertain them. And I recognize that I'm the old man at this point. I'm not the kid breaking into the business anymore. I was for the longest time. I don't know. It seemed like I was the kid trying to break into the business, and now I'm the old guy. I don't think there was a middle. I don't know what happened to that middle part.
You jumped right. You passed go. Didn't collect 200. Yeah.
Right.
No, I didn't collect the 200.
Yeah, we've talked about this on the podcast and just in general before. When you work in commercial art, when you work in animation or comics or whatever, there will be changes. The first part of our career was more like comic books had been for 40 years. And then the companies like Marvel got sold. The editors that you worked with moved on. And when they moved on, your history with the company moved on. The new people coming in want to hire their friends or people they think are good. And they don't look upon you as being part of that. That is something that you have no control over. So, but the history of comics has many stories like that, right? It has many stories. When I started at Marvel in the mid 80s, guys like Buscema and Gil Kane, guys who basically made Marvel comics by drawing thousands of Marvel comics, were no longer thought of as being vital or cool. And they were looking to push guys like that out to a great degree. I was told by one editor at Marvel that working in war books and working in sword and sorcery like Conan or whatever was essentially like not working in the business. That's how many of the editors look at that, right? So like if you're drawing the X-Men, Batman, current continuity, that meant that you were in the business. If you were working, DC had a line of war books that probably is the best line overall of books published by any company. For decades, you had people like Joe Kubert and Russ Heath and people doing, zillions and zillions of stories. Really high quality art. It's like you don't find that in general in comics. And they kind of petered out in the 80s because war stuff kind of petered out in the 80s. But to basically say that all that work is for naught, and the people who did that, well, Sergeant Rock. I mean, it's not, Sergeant Rock only matters when you met Batman. But that's the kind of thing that happens and you're not thinking about that, because the reasons you get into comics, like Terry was describing, or I got in, it was because you love the craft, you love the medium, you love the big picture of it, you love being your part in it. But then things change. So people coming along now, it's probably much better for them to create their own IP, because if you create something like I created Darkhawk for Marvel, if Marvel made $1, and after they recouped their percentage from printing or whatever, and let's say they had 45 cents left, they'd give me 1 cent. Right?
Yeah.
And Darkhawk could appear like Terry's,
like Wild Dog showed up.
boy.
In every single DC comic from now until forever, and he would not get a penny because it's not, the title of the comic is not Wild Dog, right? So there's all these ways the business is set up to be not in your favor.
Yeah.
Unless you are John Buscema or Gil Kane and you can draw 5 pages a day, right?
Yeah.
Or it happens that something that you draw accidentally becomes Wolverine.
Right. Well, what you're saying about the war comics and the sword and sorcery comics not counting was also true for the cartoon-based books. Right. I did 11 years on those Batman comics, and there were editors at DC who, if I would call them on the phone looking for a little extra work, wouldn't know who I was. And those books won Eisner Awards.
Yeah, I love that. I love that run. Yeah,
the Batman Superman World's Finest adaptation won the Eisner Award for Best Graphic Novel the year it was published. It doesn't make a blip because it isn't the continuity Batman. Never mind, it's the cartoon Batman that far more people in the real world know than know the real Batman in the comic book. And that in some comic shops, it was the best-selling Batman book if they knew how to sell comics.
Well, that's the rub. That's rub.
Crazy.
Yeah, that's the rub, is that actually the stuff, the original Batman series all the way up to Batman Beyond was far more popular than the comic book version of Batman ever was, right?
Yeah.
Millions of people, millions of kids love that stuff. They made toys. They're buying toys based upon the cartoon, not based upon, the Jim Lee version of Batman in
Absolutely.
comics. But within the business, there was a lot of people who sort of were not happy that version of stuff was more popular. So you get all these weird things in the corporation because they want their version to be popular, not that's the version that they control. That's the continuity that they control. So I think Terry and I would probably have done, I tried to do my first self-published comic in 1985, 86. I tried to do an adaptation of Wally Wood's Annie-Man. I was working with Bill Pearson, who was the executive of Wally Wood's estate, and I just simply ran out of money. Right now, we could have taken that and gone and done a Kickstarter, right? So my whole career might have been different if I had been able to Kickstarter. Like Dave Stevens shopped Rocketeer around for a long time. There's a few examples of people who eventually got somebody to do something. But if Dave Stevens could have, like, if you tried to do Bone now, you'd have to Kickstarter. Right?
Yeah.
So many things have changed in the last 10 years as far as the direct market, and now the ability to do things like Kickstarter, like, or just webtoons, right? Who knows where that's going to be in 5 years? I always think it's like radio in the first 5 years.
Yeah.
They didn't even have 24-hour radio, right?
Right.
It went on and off. Like TV used to go on and off when we were kids. At 2:00 in the morning, the Indian came on, and then that was it, right?
Yeah.
Now we live in a time where you can go and take something, put it on your Instagram, and everybody in the world can see it.
Yeah.
Never before lived in a time where artists had the ability to have everybody in the world see your stuff. Because when Terry started and I started, you would be lucky if you got reviewed in the Comic Book Buyer's Guide, which had how much was the readership? A few thousand people?
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it would take a while for your work to percolate and get out there and get so many different people seeing your work. So when you were shopping that first thing with Max, how long did it take from the time you guys had your idea till you were making it till they got into the paper? How long of a time was that?
Well, like I said, we never actually got into the paper except for the weekly page of comics. And that took quite a while to put together and sell, because we sent out a flyer. I mean, we got the editor and publisher magazine and got the list of every weekly tabloid small town newspaper in the country, every shopper, like the Nickel Weekly, those things.
Yeah.
And so, we sent out hundreds and hundreds of flyers, and we got 6 clients. And we thought, we'll try to make a go of it. And it didn't really work. But then again, it led to my entire career. So, that failure led to, a long running thing.
What I was saying is that all that effort you had to put in to get that return, right? Like if you set up hundreds of things to get 6.
Right. Absolutely. So, and also, I'm glad you mentioned the Comics Buyer's Guide, because that was part of the early part of my career that I skipped over. And I waited till after Ms. Tree had happened, but I'd known Alan Light, who published Buyer's Guide, for quite a while, because he lived just upriver in the Quad Cities from where I grew up. And when he went weekly with the Buyer's Guide, he was running out of fan art for the covers. So I started doing covers for him. And as far as I know, I'm the only guy who got paid to do Buyer's Guide covers. So I could pretend that was a professional gig and not a fan gig. But I did that for several years. And that was part of my plan, whether it worked or not, to get my work out in front of people. Because I thought, well, at least the serious collectors are going to know who I am, because they're going to see my work on the cover of this magazine once or twice a month. But that whole fanzine thing doesn't exist anymore. Now it's all on the web. But again, like, when I was teaching, this was the thing I said to my students when they'd ask me, how did you break in? And I said, well, that's irrelevant, because that situation doesn't exist anymore. The only thing in common would be get your work in front of as many people as possible. And now the way to do that is the web. And I would bring in people who were doing web strips and have them, talk to the students about, how they make it work and how long it took them to earn a living off of it, which was in some cases quite a while.
I think another thing that always comes up that people like to gloss over in search of the magic pencil that Mike likes to talk about is just the hard work. It's all of this, everybody's story. Always the foundation of it is your ass in the chair.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of people don't want, like, that's the last thing that people want to believe that gets them to where they need to be.
When I was inking, and I would be inking 2 books a month, which I did for quite a while. Especially, I think, at the point where I was inking 2 books a month for Warp Graphics on the ElfQuest series, and they were like 24-page books, plus an occasional fill in on something else. I would work horribly long days, and at the end of the day, I would be like doing this with my fingers, just to pry them off of the pen. And exhausting long hours, working overnights, staying up all night to make deadlines. Awful. I couldn't do that now. There's no way I could do that. But it was part of the business,
Yeah.
It's not all just like, oh, I'm going to draw comics and it'll be fun. It must be so much fun for you to draw comics. No, it's fun to see it in print if they do a good job of printing it. If they do a lousy job, there's nothing worse.
Right.
But the work itself was difficult and long and stressful.
You have to I always try to be real honest and upfront with people, because you have a lot of people that sell these cartooning things, and you're going to draw this little thing. It's going to you have to love this job more than anything else in order to be good at it and successful. And the people that are really successful, long-term successful, do that. And there is a sacrifice and a hard balance, especially if you have a family. One of the things that a lot of the old school guys liked about doing this is that they could be home with their kids.
Right.
Right. But you still, the one thing especially about comic strips, there's one in the newspaper every day. So you can't call up the editor and we're going to need a fill-in week. Just pull out that extra Rex Morgan story that we had.
Right.
Some guy from the Philippines draw, that doesn't exist. And in comics, you could get a break. You could say, well, I don't want the next issue of Spider-Man. I don't want the next issue of Darkhawk or whatever. You could get a fill-in. But in comic strips, you can't.
Yeah.
You pull
I found it. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right. I found it frustrating that at some point when I was inking the Batman Strikes books, which I was doing with Chris Jones as penciler, DC forced fill-in issues on us because they decided at some point that there was no way that the art teams could actually deliver 12 issues a year. That was just impossible. We couldn't do it. And so they insisted on, I think, 2 fill-in issues a year. And I was pissed, and so was Chris, because we could do 12 issues a year. Okay, right. I can ink 24 comics a year. Come on, guys, what's the deal? But yeah, we got a little break we didn't want. So another joy of the business.
Terry, I have to thank the chat room. They've been blowing it out with questions and comments. Kudos to you guys. I don't want to take up your evening, but we're just rolling here. Here's another one from Stunt Ken. There's a couple of frames for this, so just bear with me.
Okay.
So Terry said something interesting about being aware of his strengths and weaknesses as an artist, knowing what his place is in the circle. How does an artist get to know or be self-aware of their strengths and weaknesses and their place in the industry? Because there are young artists who are overly confident in their abilities, but they're not there yet. And as we've seen, don't seem to process that and seem to get bothered about it when they don't get the type of work they want. So how do you develop the self-awareness as a cartoonist to know realistically, at least in your head, where you stand in the pecking order? Thanks, Kim.
I think it's as simple as looking at Alex Raymond or Hal Foster, and then looking down at my work and just saying, "Yep, not there yet," and probably not there, at all. But what he's saying about some of the younger artists is true, and I've known people like that who just were not aware of the faults in their work, and it's kind of crazy. And those people who are not aware of their faults tend to be incredibly confident and think they're great. I knew a guy like this who would come over and show me his work, and I would say, "Let me show you this Andrew Loomis figure drawing book." "Oh yeah, I've seen that." "Okay." I'm like, "No, get the clue."
I'm so beyond that, Terry Beatty.
Yeah. No, you're not. And this guy never had any real success because of that. So I don't know. I don't know how to convince somebody to be more critical of their work. But I've always been, and some people will say, "Oh, don't be so hard on yourself." Well, it's the only way to get better. I mean, you have to be critical. You have to be self-critical. You can't improve otherwise. And it's part of the process. It's part of the understanding of seeing where your work is and knowing what you need to work on and what you need to improve on. Just deciding to be perfectly proud of everything you draw might feel good, but it's not going to make you a good artist.
Right.
I also think that the thing that's honestly probably the biggest single difference in the entire business is that the old editors, when we got into comics, still ran the roost. So their idea of what was good and how they coached you, they would say this, your work was good enough, you got a job. Then you bring in your work and your work would be reviewed. And they would say, this is good, this could be fixed. You had somebody like John Romita at Marvel. If there was a problem, the editor could go to John Romita and go, this figure looks awkward, right? And then John Romita could take a piece of tracing paper and go, well, this works, right?
Yeah.
You don't really have that now. You don't have the senior people with 30 years of experience on the editorial level like you used to, which was common.
Yeah.
So one of the things that happened was that when Image came along and the artists got their due and they went off and they said, we're the important part, we're creating. Part of that was great, but part of it also disrupted sort of like the chain of command. And part of that was learning, because this business was sort of, especially in strips, you had an assistant and then the assistant would eventually take over, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was all this checks and balances along the ways where you would go up, you would show your work, they would go, yeah, this is good, this is not so good. You don't really get that now, right? You don't get that now. You don't have that at Marvel or at DC, nor at any of the smaller companies, right?
No.
You don't have that, where a more experienced artist or craftsperson could look at your work and say, this needs to be improved. And so,
there used to be editors that, came out of the art stable. I mean, you had Joe Orlando and Dick Giordano and these guys who were editors who, clearly, knew what they were talking about if they found some deficiency in your artwork. Now they have editors who came out of fandom or just who came out of business school.
Mm-hmm.
And, the infamous moment where I was talking to an editor about pencil samples I'd been sent, that somebody they wanted me to ink, and I said, I just think the work's kind of weak and there's tangents everywhere. And the editor said, I don't think tangents matter. And I thought, that's the first thing I teach my students in my cartooning classes. Just don't do tangents.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to that? How do you respond to that?
Right. Well, I also think the other big difference is Instagram and people getting likes think that likes equals quality of work, equals level of perfection. I had 900 likes on that. That means that it's good.
Yeah.
Right.
That's currency in our
and then you're hiring people because they have so many likes. Right. So a company might hire you because you have likes, because they figure you're going to bring the customer base. They're not thinking, I'm hiring you, your likes are because you're good. So you have a lot of these other things that come out of the internet culture that affect young artists, because they go, I started putting stuff up, I got 50,000 people liking me. That doesn't necessarily relate to your actual learning. Likes are not learning.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for someone who has not experienced what we experienced to actually be able to balance that.
Yeah, that's super true.
Yeah.
I want to get to Terry's demo before he has to take a pee break.
I'm fine.
All right, that's good to hear.
My rear's a little sore at this point.
He's got
but
the truck
otherwise,
driver's friend. He's okay.
Yeah, your comfort is my number one issue.
That's appreciated.
The pencil.
Well, I could quote David Letterman and say I haven't been comfortable since I was 12.
I will take a Letterman quote.
Yeah.
So Terry was nice enough to share with us his workflow process for Rex Morgan. So I'm going to put that on the screen right now.
We're waiting for it.
All right, hold on a second. I got to make sure I open the right thing here.
The one with just the words.
Yeah, that's it. All right.
There we go.
All right. So Terry, what are we looking at?
This is today's Rex Morgan daily. And it just shows how I do the work. And I, thanks to our your lovely sponsor, I have a wonderful program that I get to draw in and write in. Because I don't sit down and write a traditional script. I write by lettering the strip. I write in the panels. I write in this template that I have for the dailies and the Sunday strips. And I put this together by sort of backtracking. My template doesn't usually have that little break there in it. So imagine I start out with just that template outline, and I start writing. Now, this is the final version, and this probably went through a rewrite or two when I would cut a line of dialogue or change a word here and there, and then go through and decide, which words to do in bold, which apparently angers one of my readers who is very irritated by the fact that I do this, that I emphasize some words.
Yeah, I remember reading that they get really upset that you bold some of the dialogue.
But everybody's done that forever, right?
Right.
Well, Woody Wilson didn't. And so for years, Rex didn't have this, but every comic strip I ever read did. And I think it's necessary, for one, just to break up the general gray look of the graphic of all those words together. It's more a visual thing, really, than anything else. But that's how I start. And I write a week's worth all at once. I sit down Sunday nights after I get my kids to bed, and I write a week's worth of script. And it's all within this template. We go on to the next one. And then I go in and I do this little rough sketch, just breaking down where the characters are. Now, I probably didn't have the copy in these exact positions until I started drawing this. I probably shoved them around, moved them around a little. And that is the great thing about working in Clip Studio or Manga Studio, in that in the old days, you lettered a strip and that was it. You were stuck unless you wanted to cut them out and paste them up and move them around. Here I can adjust and change and do whatever I want. And it's really wonderful. It saves me a lot of time and trouble and lets me fine tune the dialogue in a way that I otherwise wouldn't be able to. So then I, go through and do this little scribble and make sure that the storytelling's right and the characters are in the right place. And then, next picture, please. And then tighten it up. Okay, we move along. One more. And then I will go in and do the balloons and drop in the copyright notice and my signature slug. And I've said this before, and it seems silly. My favorite thing is dropping in the copyright notice.
It means you're almost done, right?
Because, no, it just means this is a real comic strip. Every comic strip original I ever saw in my life had that little copyright notice in it. And so it's boom. That's the thing that makes it legit somehow. So there's the pencils, and they're fairly simple. This strip doesn't really have any backgrounds to speak of because I've already established that in the previous days, and I'm just in on the conversation of these two characters. And then we move on to the inks, and there we are.
What's the brush you're using in Clip Studio?
The pen. I don't know. I'm not a tech guy. I would have to call up the screen and say, okay, what is that exactly? It's just whatever setting it was on. It's a pen. Because
there's so many different brushes, but I find that there's really only two brushes that I use, which is the G brush or G pen, and then
that might be it.
There's one that's called Yeti, which is like a big grease pencil. But a lot of the other ones, you can't really tell digitally that much difference, especially once you reduce it. It's not like using the traditional tools where you go, well, Hunt 108 is really different than a 101 where the pen's like really stiff or something.
So anyway, this is this fairly simple strip, and it seems a little too open for me to turn in like this. So if we go on to the next one, you can see that I added a little tone in the background, and that's just like the spatter airbrush tool. And this is basically something that like Chet Gould used to do in Dick Tracy, but it would be cross-hatching that would then fade into black.
Yeah.
And it gives a little depth to it, help make the characters pop out against the otherwise blank background. And again, it's characters standing around in a room talking. So once I've established it, I don't always feel like I need to do lots of detail.
Yeah.
And also, these things are printed tiny in the newspapers. On the web, it's a fairly decent size. But when you see the stuff in print, they're minuscule. And, you know, I have to deal with that. That's why the lettering is so big, and half the strip is lettering.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as I said, my readers are, you know, AARP members. Their eyes aren't so good, and I have to take that into account.
Well, and the thing is that we always have to default to what the worst thing would be with the reproduction of your strip, right? Because some papers that stretch them. There's some papers that shrink them way down. They put everything on one. There's some papers who cut them and they're not vertical. They're like horizontal. I mean, they print them all kinds of weird ways.
Yeah. And then for the black and white strip, this is the last step, which is, you know, I throw in a little gray tone. The previous version, which was just the line version, is what I would send to the syndicate for them to color. And as I said, I don't color the dailies. So this version that you're seeing on the screen right now would go in and get sent to the colorist for the newspapers that print in color and for the web. The next version with the gray tones in back is for the newspapers that print it in black and white like they're supposed to. Because it's a daily strip and they're supposed to be black and white, darn it.
And some papers do print them also in color.
Yeah, that's my point. That's why I send just the line version without this gray tone, and then I send this gray tone version as well. So I do a little extra work, I guess.
I do. I put zip on it. Sometimes I do not send two version. If I have, I just put zip on it.
Yeah, I do quite a bit of this. This one's fairly simple, where I just knocked out the background. But sometimes I do quite a bit of gray tone work with multiple tones, and you know, play around a bit, and maybe sometimes even do some drawing in it.
Yeah, that was to me one of the always a fun thing was putting zipatone and the different kind of zipatones you could buy. Tone patterns in the old days, you know. They used to make the white zip.
Oh yeah,
you know, things like that. And I remember that was like that was always you could actually go to the art supply store and they would have like a whole section where you could see, oh, here's like trees, here's weird vegetation, here's cross, and there was what Electroset, there was Zipatone, there was Electroset, and there was
Chart Pack,
right? Yeah, so there was 3 companies, and each one made a slightly different. But now I guess all that's sort of loaded into Manga Studio, and you can still buy the zip deleter. The Japanese still make it.
Yeah. Well, I used a lot of that stuff on Ms. Tree, and you know, for decades had just little bits of it stuck to my arm hairs, and then in the carpet from trimming to make it right. So much easier to do digitally. So much easier. The ease.
Experimenting? I'm sorry, Terry. Do you find yourself experimenting a little bit more because you can do digital tones than if you had like 4 sheets in your studio?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And God forbid you're trying to use craft tint paper and those horrid chemicals to bring that stuff out. This is just so much easier and so many more options. And you don't like it, you just step back, you delete the layer. It's wonderful. There's no way I could do the strip the way I do it in the amount of time I do it if it weren't digital. If I were, I think if I were doing this all on paper with ink and cutting zip, etc., man, I would be a much tireder old man than I am.
That's gorgeous.
Did you start out? When did you go digital? When did you?
I have never drawn Rex on paper. Rex has always been digital. Phantom, like I said, I started out sort of half and half with it. Toward the end, I ended up going back to digital again because of doing Rex and Phantom at the same time, and it was just a matter of time. And still, I was working 7 days a week. So it just became too much. Mike, I know you use assistants to make sure that you can get the 2 strips done per week, and it still seems to me almost a superhuman task to produce that much work. So I really admire that you're able to turn that out and have it be the quality that it is. But for me to write Rex, to draw it, and then also do the Phantom Sunday, it was just too much. And Phantom was more research heavy. It was a harder job drawing Phantom than Rex. Rex, I'm drawing offices and living rooms and ordinary people doing ordinary things. In the Phantom, one week there'd be a jet fighter and a submarine, and then there's horses. And my horses always kind of look like dogs with longer snouts. And Jose Delbo would not approve of my horses. I don't know if you heard the stories about Jose Delbo and his students.
No.
Making them draw horses over and over again. I talked to somebody who had been one of his students, and they'd say you walk in, and Jose Delbo would say, "This week we draw a horse," and they're just like, "Oh, damn it!"
not horse Wednesday. Right.
I kind of wish I had Jose Delbo make me learn how to draw a horse.
Yeah. I always say that that's one of the 7 things that you should really know how to draw. That all the old guys knew how to draw. Like every guy back in the day knew how to draw a horse, because you might get a science fiction job, then you might get a job that had a Western. You were always drawing horses. So I always tell students, you have to draw horses, cows, dogs, and cats, and lions. Those are those are the most common animals. You're doing kids books, you're doing comic books.
Yep.
You're always drawing a lion, you're always drawing a dog, you're always drawing a horse, you're always drawing a cat, and if you can draw those well, you can figure out how to draw any other animal.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a funny conversation with a mystery writer, Walter Mosley, at a mystery convention one time. He's a comic book fan. And he said, "Do you remember how Dick Ayers used to draw these really long horses?" They were just really long. And you go look at Dick's horses, and it's like, yeah, it's true.
Because I just read or listened to all 14 of the E.Z. Rollins novels this summer. So I had heard of his name before, but I think I saw an article in the Washington Post, and so I just felt I'd start with number 1, and I just burned through all of them. They're fantastic, and now I'm reading listening to another series. Like, I don't have time to read. I'm sure you're probably the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's hard with this job. It's hard to have time to read.
Yeah.
To sit down and say, I'm going to take 2 hours to read a book, because that's something you're going to do. You want to spend that time. So do you listen to stuff when you work?
When I'm working, now when I'm writing, it's quiet, but when I'm drawing, I don't work in this is not my studio. This is my nerd cave. This is where I come to escape and where I do come to read. And build model kits and listen to music. I work in the living room, sitting on the couch with my, my laptop and a drawing tablet, and I'm binging Netflix series. Now, I can't watch anything subtitled. That's the one thing that frustrates me. So, Criterion Channel does not get the work out it should. Would like to be watching more Kurosawa, but it's not happening just because there isn't the time. I'm playing shows in the background. Sometimes listening to music. I for some reason can't do books on tape. I lose track because I'm thinking too much about my own stories or something. So I will still read books and read them on paper, which is my wife thinks is crazy.
That's Terry. That's interesting that you have such a magnificent office space, but
Well, this was part of the deal with our last. This was part of our deal with our last move, where I said, okay, if we're gonna move, I need to have a real office with real bookcases and really be able to put it together and make it right. And you're seeing about a quarter of it here, but I have a little stand with a record player where I play my vinyl, and I've got this big old desk where I do my stupid model kit building. Which is, my other obsession, because while I got hooked on comic books as a kid, every one of those comic books had an ad for Aurora plastic model kits in it, and I got hooked just as bad on that.
You're just addicted to glue.
What's that?
You're addicted to glue.
A glue? No, not the glue.
You're just addicted to glue.
But Terry, you do a fantastic job with those model kits.
Thanks. That and $5 gets me a cup of coffee, but it's it's a lot of fun, and I've been very active in that hobby and have made a lot of good friends there, and know a lot of the people who sculpt the kits or do box art, and in fact did a little bit of that myself. One of my favorite things is that I designed and did the box art for a Green Lantern model kit that Mobius produced, and it's Joe Laudati did the sculpture, but I did the concept sketches, and I said, I want him to be able to fly, so I've got him in the air, and I have him shooting a big hand out of his ring, and that's what supports the figure.
Nice. I've seen that. I've seen that model. It's nice. Yeah.
And I was just thrilled when they made it work, because I did the drawing and I said, I don't know if this will really work, but this is what I'd like to do. Unfortunately, didn't sell well enough to do the rest of the line, because we were going to do Hawkman and Flash and everybody else, which would have been just a kick. But still, hey, I got to design a model kit. I actually did some art for some Big Little books a few years back, when my buddy Brandon McKinney got the job of illustrating some Star Wars Big Little books, and I ghosted a bunch of pages. So it's like all these things that are my collecting interests and my hobbies, I've kind of gotten to do a little bit of as a professional.
Yeah.
So it's been a real treat. I mean, even the monster magazines, that were an obsession for me as a kid, I did 95 out of the first 100 covers for Scary Monsters magazine. And by the way,
you got something to show us?
And I got a Rondo Award from it.
Wow.
So
nice.
Which sits on my desk.
That's awesome.
I'm not a superstar in comics, but I've been able to earn a living from it for my entire adult life. Had a few scary moments where there wasn't really any work, but mostly have been able to feed myself and provide for a family by drawing pictures. So, I mean, it's a heck of a scam.
It's a numbers game.
It's either a heck of a scam or it's just the dumbest way to earn a living ever. I'm not sure, but I managed to make it work.
Well, the other thing is that it's funny. You were talking about those hobbies. We're the three people I know that are still doing the continuity strips are not like any of the guys that used to do the continuity strips, because none of us play golf. Although I have played golf. I used to play golf
once
poorly with Andy Parks when he used to live here. We don't play golf. We don't go out and do a lot of heavy drinking like a lot of the old guys used to. And
Gatorade.
Right. So like the old cartoonists, they used to all like kick off at like 3:00 and go play golf and do things like that. We're not at that.
No, I am not a part of the country club set. I think we are very different in terms of our social status, perhaps.
I don't think Kniff played Dungeons and Dragons on the weekend.
Well, neither do I. That is one thing. I'm not a gamer.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, well, my wife is. She actually has a weekly, online meeting with friends and they play a game. But I was never into that. And people say, "Oh, why don't you? It's fun." You like, and like, no, I'm tell stories for a living. I don't want to tell stories for a game. Let's get out of here.
That's interesting.
I'm not doing that. And the same thing with like, oh, don't you maybe dress up as a character? It's like, no. I will design a costume. I'm not going to wear one. Get out of here. I'm drawing the comics. I'm not, I'm a fan, but I'm also a professional. And that I have to step away a little bit from some of the fan stuff because of that.
I did notice a thing as I teach, and I'm around a lot of college students, where you started to see a shift in who was interested in comic book conventions, and comic book conventions meant something else to them.
Oh, yeah.
So when they found out that I did cartoons and things like that, and they would say, "Well, what are you doing this weekend?" "Oh, I have a convention in New York." And they go, "Well, who are you going to cosplay as?" I said, No. That's not what I do.
I'm going as me. This character called Jamar Nicholas.
He wears his hat.
Well, it's interesting. I was talking about this with somebody the other day. There was a point at which there was this shift in comics fandom. And for me, it came when I was talking to my friend Mark Stegbauer, who's an inker on a whole bunch of comics over the years. And this is, I don't know, it's 20 years ago. And he was saying, "Yeah, my buddies and I were in a bar and I was wearing my Justice League jacket. And these girls were just really impressed by it. And they just thought it was really cool." And I thought, "Mark, you liar. That is the biggest damn lie I have ever heard from anybody." But no, it was true that the shift happened where somehow comics became cool and girls were interested in comics, because when I was coming up, it was just totally a boys' club. You go to a comic book convention, there wouldn't be any girls there.
That keeps coming up in our last,
Because I think somebody was sort of offended and thought that I was saying that there were no, women pencilers or something. But
no.
I'm sure you will agree with me. When you were going to conventions to show your work, there was never a female cartoonist in line to show work, right?
No, not at all. But by the time I was teaching at MCAD, half or more than half of my students were female, and there's some damn talented ones too.
Yeah. And I think that comes from manga and anime. The girls I used to call the Borders girls. When you go into Borders, there was always a bunch of female comic readers in there, and I think that those stories got, like, the stuff we read got us excited about creating. Same thing happened to them, but they were not going to be excited about reading, Batman.
No, and it's a much healthier thing for the business and for the hobby too. So I welcome it, but it was a little startling when it happened, and it kind of happened fast. But then also I think the other change that happened after is comic conventions turning into pop culture conventions rather than comic conventions. And that has kind of turned me off. I mean, the last big con I went to the Phoenix convention, and there were maybe 2 tables of merchandise I cared about. One table had vintage paperbacks and another had, interesting books on comics and some vintage toys. And everything else was like, you could buy a Minecraft hat. And I'm like, I don't care. I don't care. I'm not interested in that at all. I'm interested in Frank Frazetta and Jack Kirby and Alex Raymond and Hal Foster. Where's that stuff? And it wasn't there.
Right.
So it's become this social thing with costumes and fun, and I think that's great for the people who enjoy it. It's just really kind of no longer my thing. So I'm old. The world is passing me by.
I think what will happen too, my prediction is after COVID, when conventions come back, you're going to start seeing people who were into cosplay aging out.
Maybe.
Because
who knows? Who knows what's going to happen?
I've been to the Phoenix Con a couple times because I would come out and go with Brett. And it's also different because the amount of cosplay is so much greater now, because there always was. I mean, even like 10 years ago, but the amount is gigantic now. and the costumes, you know, it's not like somebody playing Mr. Fantastic and sticking a broom down his arm, you know, like, hey, I'm Mr. Fantastic. I mean, people would like now spend serious money and hours to build like a real Iron Man.
Oh yeah, there's
I mean,
incredibly impressive stuff. It's
Yeah.
just, it's not comics. It's not an artist putting lines on paper. You know, that's where my interest is. So, you know, the last comic book convention I went to that felt like a comic book convention for me was OAFCon, which is the Oklahoma con, and my late friend Bart Bush, who just passed away, was the guy who put that together and invited me out there, and it was all comics and paper and vintage paper stuff, movie stuff, and the attendees were like this who's who of early comics fandom, because it was like all these people whose names I had heard forever but had never met, and here they all were at this show, showing and buying and trading stuff, and it was just a real kick to be a part of that. But you know, that's few and far between, that kind of thing.
Well, I think now there's so much, you know, we've talked a lot in the past about, before COVID, how the calendar was getting so compressed with conventions. There'd be a convention every weekend.
Yeah.
So I think with the kind of the pop culture glut of all this, there's also opportunities to make more niche things.
Right.
So, you know, Terry could go to like a con with all of your heroes and pick up a couple model kits. And then there's the Minecraft fair, you know what I mean? I think there's enough fans.
Well, there are model kit shows.
Yeah.
There's Wonderfest in Louisville, which of course is canceled this year.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I did a little itty bitty show where the guests were me, Brian Augustin, and I'm going to blank on his name, the Lady Death guy.
Oh, Polito.
Yeah, Ryan Polito. And that was it. We were the guests, and it was like in an American Legion, and there were maybe 12 dealers, and it was old comics and Big Little books, and a guy with just a table full of $2 comics boxes.
Yeah.
And, you know, the guests are over there, right?
Right.
Through $2 boxes, like Jesse Marsh Tarzan. Okay, I'm taking that one. Look, you know, a crappy copy of an Invaders comic by Frank Robbins. All right. And that was fun because, again, it was a comic show, but teeny tiny little show. I mean, that's the way to go.
Yeah, sometimes those small ones are the best because you feel like, you know, the spotlight's on you and you get more attention, and the people's attention isn't as divided as in a mega con.
True. Yeah. Well, that's the, I'm sure you guys have touched on this, is the issue for cartoonists at a huge convention is we're way in the back of the room, and by the time they've gotten to us, they've already spent $100 on Bill Shatner's autograph, and they don't have any money left after the parking and the hot dog.
Yeah, especially in Philly, because they'll bleed you out front.
Yeah. Oh well, we're old and cranky, aren't we?
You're parking in. The parking, that's one of the reasons why I try to price if I do a sketch, I don't try to price crazy prices, because you figure by the time you spent your $60 to get in and your $60 to park and everything else, and you buy a really horrible hot dog or whatever.
That's $20.
Right. You try to give something back to the fan, but you also have to earn. You need to pay your hotel bill, because we don't all get comped hotel bills.
True.
You know, they might comp your table, but you don't all get comped hotel bills. I wanted to ask you, Terry, with all your interest in the old strips, did you start collecting specific old strips when you could find them?
Well, when I was a kid, you know, there were only a handful of books that reprinted this stuff. There was Celebrated Cases of Dick Tracy. There was a Little Orphan Annie book. There was a Buck Rogers book. And then beyond that, there wasn't much. What I collected...
Like original art.
Oh, original art. Yeah. When I started collecting original art, it was strips as much as it was comic books when I was buying stuff. And I had a pretty nice collection at one point, which, you know, all got sold trying to pay off back taxes, etc. But I had an Alex Raymond X9 daily with a character named Terry in it. I had a hand-colored Milt Kniff Terry Sunday with Terry kissing the Dragon Lady.
Wow.
I had 2 dailies from the Flat Top story, Dick Tracy. Yeah, I had nice examples of most of the major newspaper strips. Like I said, I had a Peanuts daily. Because again, $35. Sure, I'll take one. And that stuff all got traded away or sold, and for values and prices that would just seem ridiculous now.
Look for stuff now, bargains or anything? You still?
I really don't collect original art much anymore. I don't have a lot of wall space. I still have a Tracy daily that Chet Gould signed to me on the wall. I have a few comic book pages still up. I have a Jim Aparo page that he signed to me. But not a lot of art left in the collection. I have tended to focus on buying books and vintage toys, mostly comic strip character related toys. And you can see some of it on the shelves back there.
Yeah, I love your studio.
My Milt Caniff worship area there.
I love the
3
shrine.
shelves of Caniff stuff. Yeah, it's a totally shrine. So no, I just can't pay the prices that original art goes for anymore. Once in a while, something crazy will come along as a bargain. I was a guy who had a bunch of original art from the Blondie comic books.
Oh, wow.
I think Paul Fung, if I'm remembering the name, or Paul Fung Jr., who was the artist. And I got a couple of these pages that were like puzzle pages or game pages, and they were like $10.
You got to do it. Yeah.
So I got to have those. Right. Of course, they're not in a frame. They're just in a portfolio. What's the point of me even having them? But I couldn't resist it. So I guess that the art collector in me is still there. I just have had to rein him in because I can't afford what I want.
Do you think, we're going to start wrapping, Terry. You've been a wonderful guest. I was thinking about just kind of the astronomical rates for original art. Like, it's really not a hobby that somebody young could get into, really. Could they? I mean, where's the entry point for collecting original art?
Well, I think you could if you're buying sketches from currently working artists.
Yeah.
If you're picking up obscure stuff. But yeah, things that used to be $10 a page back in the 70s now go for thousands.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, I know Max had a Metamorpho splash page by Ramona Fraden that I know he paid $10 for. God, last time that thing sold, again, it was thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Mike Sikowski pages. You didn't used to be able to give away a Mike Sikowski page, and now thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really tough.
I think Mike froze.
Mike froze.
Oh, Mike froze.
That's too bad.
It's also different what people who are reading now, what they're interested in. Because
true.
What your interest is. Like, if you're interested in webcomics, there probably isn't an original.
No.
Most people are working digital, right?
Yeah. But you might be able to get a sketch of the character from that artist.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I used to buy a lot of I still got you can still get stuff. I got this where is it? I got this 2 Al McWilliams strips off of eBay.
Dateline Danger?
Yeah. And
that's gorgeous.
Beautiful.
He helped Al out several times, but this guy, I mean, just a good, solid, old-fashioned. I mean, I love the lettering. I love the craftsmanship of these. I think were like $50 or something. I mean, they were pretty.
Yeah, that's like, it's kind of shameful that they're that cheap, but then again, who's interested? It's a very limited audience. Yeah, I mean, this is the case too with a lot of what I collect. I mean, I'm probably the one of the younger Big Little Book collectors on the planet, and I've been able to get them crazy cheap lately because the other collectors are dying, and nobody younger than me gives a damn. Mm-hmm. So what used to be a $50 book, I can pick up for $10. And, I'm thrilled to get them cheap because now, oh, great, I never thought I'd be able to own that one. But it's also kind of sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was.
I would always advise the young cartoonists to get stuff like this, because like you have this one where you see like the tree, you know, you see the tree, you see a lot of
lots of technique
craft,
there. Yeah.
Right. So you learn things like how to do folds or whatever. You can apply it to another style, but I always try to tell people, you look at like, especially web cartoonists, lettering is really important. That's one of the things that hurts a lot of people's strips in the beginning, is their lettering is unreadable. And I always tell the young cartoonists, if people have to struggle to read your comic, they're not.
Yeah, they're not going to bother.
They're not going to, and then you showed them how to do the Ames lettering guide, or the other thing is that each artist had a style of lettering. Like Schultz had his lettering, Ketchum had his lettering, and Walt Kelly had his, and they're beautiful lettering, and the lettering was such an important part of the strip. It just wasn't just there so you read it. I was just looking at some old Gordo strips.
Oh yeah,
beautiful lettering, and I think that part of just using the machine to put your stuff in there means you kind of skip over that whole part. But we don't have that. What was it? The one guy, was it Ben Oda or whatever, used to drive around and collect everybody's. Was one guy lettered like how strips. He would drive around to each guy's studio and pick up a couple weeks worth of strips to letter, and then take it back, and then they would be inked.
Yeah,
we don't have guys driving around to our house anymore. To pick up a letter.
I have a computer program.
Yeah. Virtual Ben Oda here to letter.
That's great.
Well, better than A Machine from Charlton Comics. Worst letterer ever.
Well, this has been a really amazing episode, Terry. Thanks so much. I just said the MVP of the night has been the chat room. They've been keeping my fingers busy since we started. And I think a lot of that comes to you, Terry. So thanks for bringing these fantastic people along.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's been a pleasure to be in the same room with you two guys, even if it's a virtual room. One of these days when this current mess is over, let's make it a real room.
Yes, let's do it. I appreciate that.
We'll swap pages.
And Terry, where can people follow you or find you on socials?
I'm not terribly active. I have a Facebook page, and that's it. There's a web page and a blog out there, but they're both so horribly outdated that there's not a lot of point in searching those out.
But you have a lot of art on your blog, though. You have a lot of.
I do, but it's again, I haven't touched that blog for a couple of years. So people want to go look at old stuff, they can find it.
So and your I'm sorry, Mike, in your Facebook, is that a personal, or do you have a fan page too?
I do have a fan page as Terry Beatty Artist, but that is mainly just the Rex Morgan strip. And the occasional other commercial piece. But if people want to follow me, if they're not going to be offended by my extremely liberal politics, they can take a look at my Facebook page.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Terry. I really appreciate it. This was great. And the chat room just said they had a fantastic time. So thanks again. We'd love to have you back on when you're ready to come back.
All right, I'll get a bigger cushion for my rear end here. That's a long time to sit, but whatever.
It just, the time just happened so fast, but I know it's a long sit, so we'll let you go. So thanks so much, Terry.
Right,
you have a great night. All right,
you too.
Night. Good night, brother. Kicked him. I love it. It's my favorite part.
You were getting cookies delivered. I don't know what.
Yeah, man. I got some fresh cookies delivered to the crib. That's what's up, to the studio. I want to thank you guys. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us. I think we had a really great show. And Mike, I'm really happy to say that every Wednesday and Saturday we get more kind of like viewer reactions. Like it really means a lot to me and to Mike when you guys tell us what you like. If you hung out with us, we just like them. If you hang around and watch this show for 2.5 hours live, then you must be enjoying what we're doing. So thank you so much. Like I said a million times in the chat, this only gets better if we get our numbers up. So please, if you're watching on YouTube, don't just show up randomly every Wednesday and Saturday. Subscribe, because if you subscribe, you get a notification when we're having our next guest. Facebook page, same thing. Like and follow us. And hold on, JRD wants to know, Mike, what is that mug you have there, Mike Manley?
What is that mug? It is a
hold it up.
Komodo dragon mug.
Komodo dragon. Nice, thanks. So Mike, I have a little surprise for you guys. Hold on, let me do my ADD thing. So I want to give a plug for our Wednesday guest. You ready for this? What?
All dead.
Blap, blap, blap. Yeah, so I got to do graphics. So this Wednesday coming up, New Mutants co-creator Bob McLeod is going to be joining us. Bob is a fantastic guy, and we didn't just ask Bob to come on because of the New Mutants movie that just came out, but I'm sure he has a lot to say about that. But yeah, so if you guys aren't sure by now, we go live every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. EST. So please join us here on Wednesday with Bob. We're going to have a lot of fun. Tell your friends. As soon as I post the kind of like save the date for the episode, please signal boost and share that with your people so we can just flood the chat room with good vibes. So thanks so much.
We love questions.
Right? And yeah, a big shout out to JRD for front loading us with questions. It helps me to be able to just kind of pick things right off the top. But thanks everybody who asked questions. And just like I said, we didn't get to everyone's question tonight because we had a lot of them. So I'm going to ask Terry if he can go back through the replay and answer any questions from the chat room. Mike, any last words?
Let's see. My commissions list is open, so if anybody is interested in getting a commission, email me at mike@actionplanet.com.
If you want a commission from Modern Master Mike Manley, hit him up at Mike at Action Planet. And it goes without saying that Mike does fantastic work. So you don't even need to get vouched for Mike Manley. You know what you're getting. You know what you're getting.
Oh, if they go on my Facebook page or my Twitter, they can see I posted in the last couple of days. I posted a bunch of old commissions, which is funny doing that because then I came across commissions that I don't remember drawing.
Yeah,
and that's weird to get to the point. I almost always remember everything that I've drawn.
Yeah,
but I came across a couple commissions that I do not remember having drawn from like 2000. So it's very odd.
Wow, man. And I think I've been in there like a couple of times where like I don't remember trying that. But yeah, it happens, especially if you put pen to paper so often. It kind of stays in your head somewhere. Like you remember, like you can find things in old sketchbooks because you remember where you drew that and when you drew it and where it was, right?
Also pre-cell phone. Because before I had my cell phone, I would go to conventions and you draw something, but you would never have a copy of it, right? And until now, I see copies of old sketches from people that bought them on the internet. So that might also be the thing too, is you don't get to remember. Oh yeah, I remember drawing that in St. Louis.
That's awesome. But yeah, you guys, please hit up Mike. Mike, how many slots do you have open on your commission list?
I still have slots. I got slots.
It's got slots. That's what's up. All right, hold on. Last question, and we're going home.
Okay.
Stuntkin wants to know, Mike, will you ever get a Darkhawk collection from Marvel?
They did make one. There is one available now. There is a Darkhawk collection.
It's the full. It's the full book, or
like the first 7 or 8 issues or something like that. I don't know whether they will ever do another collection. of it. Because I worked up till 25, so they probably have to do 3 to get all of them in there.
Kind of boom, 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 right?
But I don't know whether DC seems to be much better at collecting stuff. Like we just got the Shazam thing, and they do a better job. I just did. I think I showed it last week. I got
Was that your Shazam omnibus?
I got the Shazam omnibus, and then Marvel sent out a reprint of Iron Man comics that had the Darkhawk annual.
Oh, right, yeah, you showed that last up, yeah.
So yeah, every once in a while I'll get some odd reprint collection from Marvel, and it'll have like an issue that had like Ghost Rider or Captain America or just like one job mixed in with a bunch of other stuff.
Here's another question. Wow, you guys are giving us a lot of love tonight. I appreciate it. Michael Cooper asks, can I just compliment you guys on Draw Magazine? A real great resource.
Thank you. You can.
Arigato gozaimasu. Appreciate that. And it's been a dream of mine to be able to work on the magazine as long as I have. It helps that I know the editor, but I think I hold up my end pretty well. So I appreciate that. All right, you guys, thanks so much for your kind of like after the guest chat. We're going to head out. We got to kick out because we got to get back to the tables. So thank you guys so much. And remember, we'll be back here Wednesday with Bob McLeod.
And Cornwell.
Oh, and Cornwell. and you know what happens next. You guys have a great night. Remember, wash your hands and the Kirby hands.
Kirby cat hands. Kirby cat hands.
I love it. All right, you guys. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Night.
Night.